to be here. I am fortunate enough to do a lot of media appearances, and when people ask me on the news, Susan, what's it going to take to get this economy going? And I said, get small businesses growing, and then the economy will grow as well. And so that's what we're all about here today, to talk about how to spark entrepreneurship in this country. And we've got some great panelists, some great speakers. You're going to love it. We're all going to exchange our ideas and hopefully walk out of here with a lot of energy for entrepreneurship. Just a couple of little housekeeping things. There are some programs and bios on that back table. The program is really packed, so we're going to keep things moving right along. There are also some snacks over there, a little water, a little coffee. If you need to take a little break and you hear your stomach growling a little bit because you didn't eat a lunch today, well, you can go grab a little something over there. I want to thank so much the SBE Council for sponsoring this today. I am a special advocate with the group, and it's such a wonderful experience for me. I am known, my trademark is the small business expert, and you'll hear a little bit more about me later, and this is not about me anyway. And I want to thank AT&T for this beautiful facility as well. But most importantly, I want to thank all of you again for being here, because your support of small business is critical for all of us out there. And with that said, I don't think, oh, please silence your cell phones, please, or put them on vibrate, whatever you want to do, but we don't want to be interrupted by those nasty little phone rings. I'll have to come and take it away from you or put you in a timeout in the corner. So I would love to introduce my good friend, Karen Kerrigan, who is the president and CEO of the SBE Council. Karen?
Well, great. Thank you all for coming. Our early arrivers, thank you very, very much. We'll be expecting quite a few folks today. And Susan, thank you for all you do for small business. She does so much for SBE Council in terms of her educational content and providing us expertise that we get to our members on a nationwide basis. So, and for all of you that are joining us via live stream, hello, thank you. And we also are hashtag Startup Policy. So if you want to engage through Twitter and social media, we encourage you to do so. Gosh, I mean, strengthening entrepreneurship and getting new business creation going again, it really is at the core of what SBE Council works to do. I'm honored that we have such tremendous speakers today, beginning with this amazing panel who are not only going to be talking about the challenges, the barriers, maybe where we are, we'll hear some data, but also the opportunities, because there is a lot of hope out there from a policy perspective, but there's a lot of work that needs to get done to really get the dynamism, as you would say, John, and the growth growing from an entrepreneurial perspective. Following this panel, we have some great entrepreneurs who will be sharing their stories. The FCC Commissioner, Mike Riley, will also be talking with us today with respect to what that agency is doing on to get private sector investment really moving again to ensure that everyone has access to broadband and all the great tools that will allow people to start businesses anywhere in this country. The acting chair of the Federal Trade Commission, Maureen Olhausen. I mean, you wouldn't think the FTC does much for small business, but I got to tell you, she's doing some regulatory reform things, but also she's looking at occupational licensing and what needs to be done to bring down that barrier at the state and local level that is really harming opportunity and entrepreneurship across the country. We added Dan Gilbert, the chairman and founder of Quicken Loans, Rock Ventures, and the majority owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers. He'll be with us at 4:30 today. And then Kellyanne Conway, counselor to the president, will wrap up our program. And don't forget about our reception afterwards. Chairman Steve Shabbat, the House Small Business Committee, of the House Small Business Committee, will join us. You know, he's really smart. He knows when to join us during the reception, right? So, but that's when you get a lot of work done in Washington. But he really is a great leader for entrepreneurs and small businesses. So we're going to get going with the panel right now. And I'm going to turn it over to Tom Sullivan, longtime friend, and who's currently serving as Vice President, Small Business Policy at the U.S. Chamber. So Tom, take it away.
Thank you, Karen. I actually have the easiest job of the afternoon. I only have to direct your questions to this panel. And when the panel ends with a small business expert, anything that we've said incorrect will be corrected by Susan. It is just a great honor to be here this afternoon among so many people whose core mission it is to encourage entrepreneurship, encourage small business economic growth. And hopefully, all of you will take a little bit away from today in some of the things that you can do from a policy perspective to basically stimulate that type of activity, get our economy going, and growing small businesses, growing communities, growing the United States economy. At the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, we represent the interests of over 3 million businesses in the United States, and that is through direct membership and our partners of associations, partner organizations like SBE Council, and partner organizations, local, state chambers of commerce across the United States. Over 96% of our members have fewer than 100 employees. 75% of chamber members actually have fewer than 10 employees. Each of the panelists will get a brief introduction by me that will not do them justice, because in order to really highlight their careers, you would have to have a 10 to 15-minute introduction for each of them. So their full bios are available towards the front of this room, but I'll give a small snapshot, allow each of the panelists to introduce themselves in a way that is a little bit better than I could ever do, and then talk a little bit about some of the things they're working on and suggestions for policy options to help entrepreneurship. With that in mind, we are going to be relying on you to provide questions so that this dialogue really gets stimulated. We are able to leave you with answers to questions. But before I do, I'll let you know one thing that the Chamber of Commerce is doing to try to contribute to the policy discussion around small business. We have just launched, in partnership with MetLife, a quarterly small business index. There are plenty of these available for you over in the front of the room. This is a quarterly index that takes a random sample of 1,000 small business owners every quarter, live phone interviews by Ipsos, which is the same survey firm that does the Consumer Sentiment Index and has been doing that for 10 years. Great firm. And it shows the trends, long-term trends of small business. The great news that you've probably already heard is that small businesses overall are optimistic. That should be no surprise to the small business advocates gathered here today. In fact, sometimes we say they're maybe a little too optimistic. But in this case, when the economy needs that optimism, that is great news. In fact, 6 out of every 10 of the small businesses interviewed has a positive economic outlook. And for every one small business that was interviewed in this quarter that said, we don't think things are going very well, 5 small businesses actually gave the contrary view that things were looking pretty good. And so that bodes well. I suspect you'll hear similar optimistic sentiment throughout the panel this afternoon. There are some storm clouds that we'll probably talk about too, but I'm sure many of the things we'll talk about this afternoon will be guides for us in a policy way to help ride that wave of optimism into realistic and really possible economic growth through stimulating entrepreneurship and small business. So with that, I will turn it over to our first panelist, Ray Keating. When you read Ray's bio and the amount of work that he's doing and the amount of writing he's doing, both fiction and nonfiction, you will probably wonder whether he sleeps. He's never directly answered my question of whether he sleeps, but he is a prolific writer and researcher on economic trends in small business and entrepreneurship. He has been with the SBE Council, I think, from the start, and is a tremendous small business advocate through his research. So, Ray?
Tom, thanks very much. Appreciate that. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. Tom referred to me before as I'm one of the people that's setting the table. And Karen mentioned the data person, so I guess that's my role. I'm going to go through some numbers very quickly, and then we'll go to the rest of the panelists, but just to give you an idea. Now, Tom, fortunately, talked about small business optimism already. And when you look at, I think, every poll I've seen so far, certainly since late last year, small business optimism has been up substantially. So that's the good news. I want to talk a little bit about the state of entrepreneurship, number of small businesses, number of businesses in general, and that's where we get some more sobering data. The most recent analysis we did, we looked at incorporated and unincorporated self-employed. We also looked at the number of employer firms in the economy. And when you look at where we should be as a share of the population, the relevant population, so on and so on, given the historical background, we're down by our estimate, and I think this is conservative, by about 3.4 million businesses. That's what we call, we're missing those businesses. That's a huge gap, to say the least. Now, when you go into certain industries, of course, there's some good news. You know, energy, I just did a little energy analysis, and while the number of employer firms over the last, say, since 2005 are down in the overall economy, energy's been up. And guess what? The energy sector, and they've been up substantially, anywhere from 5% to one sector is up almost 60% in terms of the number of businesses. That's exciting. And the energy sector has been exciting. I mean, we know the changes in technology there and how we went from being dependent on foreign sources of energy forever, and now we're the leading natural gas and oil producer on the planet. That's an exciting development, to say the least. So there's good news there, and guess what? Those are mostly small businesses. It's not just, as we say, big oil or big energy. It's overwhelmingly about small business. Number two I want to touch on is private investment. You know, our economy has struggled, obviously, since, if you want to call it the Great Recession. We've had one of the worst recovery expansion periods on record, about growing at about 2.1% a year. We should be growing during an expansion period of about double that amount. So it's been a real challenge. Part of that, or a big reason for that, is a lack of private sector investment. Again, when you look at the numbers, we're just nowhere near where we should be. And in 2016, private investment actually declined, including private business investment. That's the first time that's happened since the recession in 2009. So there's some sobering numbers there. On the good news front, I'm one of those economists, one hand and the other, the first quarter saw a substantial increase in private sector investment. So hopefully that's sustainable, and that's been our problem throughout much of this expansion recovery is, when we have some good news, it hasn't been sustainable. So hopefully we'll get some policy changes that will improve sustainability. The last point I want to touch on very quickly is access to capital or financing, which is obviously critical for small businesses. When you look at small business loans, we've actually resumed growth in about 2013, so we've been growing since then, which is good news in terms of the value of small business loans, the number of small business loans. But we're still well below, quite frankly, the pre-recession levels. We have not gotten back to where we should be, never mind the growth that we should have experienced. On the other front, angel investment is another big area, obviously, for entrepreneurs, and we saw a decline in that in 2016. And the last few years have been kind of flat. And we're still, again, below the pre-recession level. Venture capital has been a little bit of a different story. We had a nice bounce back and recovery in that area after the recession. But again, the last year in 2016, we saw a decline in venture capital investment. So that's kind of a very quick and I guess somewhat depressing look at the numbers, but we have to understand where we are and why we need some pro-growth, pro-entrepreneur, pro-small business policy changes to get some real sustainability in terms of strong economic growth. And I think we're going to touch on things like tax reform and relief and regulatory reform and relief and trade issues and so on. And we really just need to be putting those policies in a strong pro-growth direction, providing real relief. I mean, that's the bottom line to entrepreneurs and small businesses, and I think we'll see some real changes.
Well, thank you, Ray. Our next panelist is Alan Gutierrez. He is a friend to many of us because of his long work in Washington, D.C. on small business issues, most recently heading the programs for the Latino Coalition. Alan has worked as an official at the U.S. Small Business Administration before, so he knows his way around. He now heads the Office of Entrepreneurial Development. SBA Administrator Linda McMahon likes to talk about the 3 C's, which are capital, counseling, and contracts, as part of SBA's portfolio to help small business. Alan Gutierrez heads the C that is counseling, has an amazing portfolio of dedicated professionals and partner organizations who work every day to help small business. And Alan is going to push them all in the right direction. Alan?
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. You took half of my speech away, but that's all right. No, before I get started, certainly great to be here, and certainly I want to first thank Karen Kerrigan for her leadership and all that she does. I know in my previous capacities I've been able to work with her in a lot of areas, and I know from her passion on small business and what she does day in and day out. So why don't we give her a round of applause for putting this together. I also wanted to, before a couple brief overviews in terms of the Office of Entrepreneur Development and what we're doing at SBA under the leadership of Administrator McMahon, I did want to quickly acknowledge some of the team that's here from SBA, because certainly that's one thing that the administrator has really put together as a caliber team that comes from expertise from all parts of the country and industries, and it's exciting. It's exciting to be part of that new team as we're looking at ways to move the agency to a more effective and efficient way. So I wanted to recognize one of my bosses, which is Eric Jones, Deputy Chief of Staff. Eric, thanks for being here. Also, Ryan Lambert and Andrew Cofield, who are part of the Entrepreneur Development. And then we have an intern with us, Gabriela Jeter, who will be our future boss in the future, right? That's what we're training you to be. And I wouldn't want to also forget the Office of Advocacy and the Colonel that's here with us as well. Thank you for being here, which is a very integral part of SBA and all the areas that they do. And I know that Tom led that division before in his capacity. But in any case, again, I just wanted to recognize, well, you know, I keep recognizing everybody. My time will be up and Tom will cut me off on the mic. But Ken Yancey, good to see you here as well from SCORE. But as Tom mentioned, you know, the Office of Entrepreneur Development is an area that works primarily on the one part, the C of counseling. And certainly from the 3 pillars that we have, our street lanes, I would say, is the Small Business Development Centers, SCORE, which is Service Corps Retired Executives, and the Women's Business Centers. So the exciting part of that is that all those 3 different lanes really are our ambassadors, really are on the ground, getting the messaging out and helping entrepreneurs and small businesses in their needs and their direction too, in that sense. And the beauty about that is that, you know, over the year, for example, approximately 1.25 million small businesses that were assisted through those 3 individual networks of ours or resource partners altogether. The great other part of it is that all those 3 different divisions are available across the country. So it's not in one specific geographical area that we are only focusing on. We're across the country everywhere in that sense. You know, you guys know the numbers. You know what SBA does, advocates on the interests of 29 million small businesses. You know, every 2 out of 3 new jobs are created by small business. You know, critical small business owners is a voice, and it needs to be heard in Washington, and certainly not only heard but also assisted, because it's the engine, it's the backbone across the country from that perspective. I know that was mentioned earlier in regards to the optimism and where that's leading and seeing small business looking at that. So from our perspective is how do we incorporate the enthusiasm, the opportunity, looking at the regulations that are challenging, that will assist small business, that, you know, they can then focus on their core areas of business and not worry about, you know, the unknown factor. You know, we always say that it's, you know, you can always give me a yes or a no, but the maybes are the ones that kill you, right? And for a small business, that is the case. On the entrepreneur side of it too, it's like, well, how do I do this? Should I go this route? Should I not? And that's what our centers are there for. That's what SCORE is there for. That's what the Small Business Development Center and the Women Business Centers. The beauty of that I always say too is that, you know, you're going in there sometimes with the conceived idea of a business that you want to start, and you walk out of there afterwards being directed and told, given a better perspective of, maybe your strengths are starting a business in this area. And then so we help that part too, in a sense, because we know that, as a small business, we're risk takers, entrepreneurs, we're risk takers, and, we fall and we get back up, right? And that's part of our DNA. But if we can at least help less of them falling down, but more moving forward. That's one of the goals that we're looking at from the perspective. I'm excited to be back at SBA, and certainly with the leadership of the administrator and her vision. I know we'll talk a little bit later of what are the areas that we're going to be focusing on and what we're doing from a DC to nationwide perspective. But I'll leave it to there because I know we have other panelists to give another view. But thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Alan. Our next panelist is John Lettieri. He co-founded the Economic Innovation Group. And one of the exciting things that John is involved with is studying all aspects of entrepreneurship and how dynamic that part of the economy is to the overall American growth dynamic. He's going to share with us a little bit about his background, including what he is working on now and what EIG has already done in the past. And so, John, welcome to the panel, and wow us with the data and numbers and research that EIG produces.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks to Karen and her team for putting on this event. I'm probably just going to, instead of wowing you, I'll probably just add to the sobering news that Ray introduced us to earlier. I think really the fundamental challenge that we're focused on at EIG is what transformations have happened in the economy since the Great Recession and what they mean for the future of access to opportunity and upward mobility, and for communities that are being left behind in this recovery. So a lot of the data that Ray mentioned earlier is really at the centerpiece of our focus. I'll just add a couple other things to that. I think it's one of our challenges here is that while we have a growing awareness of some of these trends in entrepreneurship, I think there's a lack of connectivity in the policy debate to just how severe those trends are, what their implications are for the broader economy. If you look at the rate of new firm formation, it's about half of what it was in the 1970s when we started keeping records on the firm creation rate. And that number really collapsed starting with the recession. And unlike so many other things that have bounced back in the economy, the rate of new business formation has barely nudged up from its all-time low in 2013. The ripple effects of that are pretty profound when you think about the job openings that new firms create in the economy. So when you look at that part of the economy, people are actually staying put in their jobs at a record rate. People switch jobs at about half the rate they once did. Not too long ago, the late 1990s. People move across state lines at half the rate they did in the late 1990s. This is not that long ago that we had a much more changeful, much more disruptive economy. So this whole mythology that we have now that today is the most disrupted, changeful period in American economic life, and that's really one of the key concerns. It's actually the opposite. We should be more concerned than ever about the lack of change, the lack of dynamism, the lack of vitality in the economy. That's what people are feeling in these communities that have been left behind. So the death rate of firms, while we're talking about the startup rate, we should talk about the death rate of firms. That's at an all-time low. So firms are dying out more slowly than they ever have before. That's not the problem. We have a creation problem, not a destruction problem. And if you get that part right, then the policy agenda that follows from that looks very different than if you believe there's a disruption problem. And so I think we should start there as advocates and people who believe strongly in the power of entrepreneurship. That's really the premise that we have to lead with when we're talking to policymakers, when we're talking to mayors and governors. Because as somebody mentioned earlier, you look at what FTC is doing on occupational licensing. A lot of these huge barriers, a lot of the relief that we need is at the state and local level to just get out of the way of really the molecular level of the economy as human capital, the human being, the entrepreneur, the worker deploying their skills. We've made it really hard for people to just efficiently, without permission from an employer, without permission from government, go and be innovative, go and compete in the workforce. We've got to get back to a time when that we used to have, not too long ago, when it was just much easier to do those things. We didn't put barrier after barrier in the way of people who have skills, who have the entrepreneurial drive, but for whom there's just not the kind of resources to get over those impediments that we've artificially put up in the economy. And the beneficiaries of many of those impediments, by the way, are incumbent companies. So there's less competition in many industries than we've ever seen before. Huge concentration among what we would say is roughly 2/3 of American industries, a lot of other research to back that up. That's a problem. We're a market economy. We depend on competition to drive innovation, productivity gains. We talk about low growth rates. Upstream from all of this is that lack of new business formation, that lack of competition that it produces, the lack of innovation that comes from firms competing to deliver a better product and capture customers. If we lose that, and we're losing it now, if we really lose that, that's a fundamental transformation of our economy, and it's very hard to come back. You can look at Western Europe if you want to glimpse into the potential future of what a much less dynamic economy looks like. So I think that's the fundamental challenge. We at EIG really think that is if we get nothing else right, if we get that part right, the future looks very bright for the U.S. economy. If we get it wrong, really nothing else is going to matter in terms of returning to that high growth, high innovation economy that we got used to.
Well, thank you, John. No doubt in my mind that we just have to get it right. So thank you. We now go to one of my colleagues at the Chamber of Commerce. We've stacked the panel, so thank you, Karen. Frank Cullen works in our Global Intellectual Property Center. He's done a great deal of work about connecting the importance of intellectual property protections and small business growth. Frank?
Thank you, Tom. I'd also like to join my colleagues up here on the panel in thanking Karen and Ray for their great work and also for putting on today's event. It's interesting. People might ask, why would the U.S. Chamber of Commerce care about small businesses or about intellectual property? And that's what I work on, is intellectual property. I'm the executive director for our domestic policy. But I think Tom hit the nail on the head. We have businesses of all sizes. And if there's one thing we know, it's that innovation often occurs at the small business level. In addition to that, it's a huge driver of job creation. So for us, critically important that we get the policies right to support small businesses, and also critically important that we recognize the role IP plays in really helping small businesses thrive. So what's the current environment? Well, at the risk of maybe a little copyright infringement, it's kind of a tale of two realities now for our folks in the small business community. On the one hand, you look at it, it's kind of the best of all times and the worst of all times. You have opportunities through the digital platforms and the internet that have created abilities for folks to market their goods globally in a way that was unheard of 20 years ago. So there's a lot of opportunity to have access to new markets, and there's a lot of opportunity for folks who could not compete in the past to really get out there and present their products to whole new marketplaces and consumers. So that's the good news. The bad news, as we heard from other panelists, is that lack of capital, policy issues, and other competitive issues have really made it a much more difficult time for small businesses to succeed. So what does that mean from the standpoint of the work of the U.S. Chamber? Well, from our standpoint, we look at IP as sort of that critical component very often for a small business that often is that one indispensable asset that they have that gives them a leg up. So from that standpoint, unlike tangible assets, such as a manufactured good, a film, a book, the idea or concept that somebody who starts a small business may introduce into the marketplace can really separate them from all the other competitors. And really clear to me, IP is often that single most valuable asset. I think all of you know there are 4 basic types of IP. You've got your patents, copyrights, trademarks, trade secrets, and each have their own usefulness to small businesses. But they're often misunderstood, and small businesses often don't have the resources or the ability to really understand how to maximize that asset, and in some cases, to protect it. So a big part of our work is making sure, and this is certainly in conjunction with policymakers and the administration, SBA plays a large role, educating small businesses to understand why it's so important that they recognize how to protect their intellectual property. It's also important that policymakers are educated about this, because very often people talk about intellectual property, policymakers, their eyes glaze over, they say, wow, I don't want to talk about copyrights or patents, that's really technical legal stuff. What I'd like to hear about, what creates jobs back in my district? What's going to really help my local economy? Well, what we're going to tell you is that very often our research has shown that jobs are created through small businesses, and basically a lot of those small businesses have IP assets. So what's happening in terms of the policymakers? Are they paying attention up on the Hill? Are they paying attention in the administration? The good news on that is the answer is yes. There's been legislation addressed. Some of the major threats you're going to see. Basically, you have a lot of problems right now in the marketplace for small businesses from things like patent trolls, access to understanding how to get patent protections, understanding the role that different IP policies play. And if you have an uneducated businessman who's dealing with IP issues, thanks, Susan, who really doesn't understand what type of IP protection they should have, or whether they have the resources to devote to getting those type of IP protections, they can be at a real disadvantage. So that's where making sure policymakers put the right policies in place to make sure that groups like SBA and other governmental institutions and groups like the U.S. Chamber are available to assist small businesses to succeed. Because if there's one thing we know, it's that if an IP asset is not protected, and you have a situation where a small business is exposed to either somebody coming in and stealing that asset that they have, or putting them at a competitive disadvantage, they're not going to be able to become that successful entity that's going to create jobs, contribute to our economy, and bring new, innovative products to market. And the one thing that we've seen that separates America from the rest of the world is we are the leader in innovation. And so much of this innovation occurs at this small business level. So from the U.S. Chamber's perspective, what we're going to try to do is continue to work with policymakers up on the Hill. You know, it's interesting, the Small Business Committee that Chairman Chabot chairs had a wonderful opportunity for us to come up to the Hill, do a briefing for congressional staff to talk about the role IP plays in small businesses. And we've done other events up on the Hill to try to educate folks about the role IP plays in small businesses. So from our perspective at the GIPC, what we're really trying to do is continue to give American companies, particularly those small businesses, that competitive edge. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Delighted to talk a little bit more. I know IP is just one component of how small businesses compete and how they are successful. But because of the importance of innovation in our creative economy, we think it's a very central component, and we're delighted to have the opportunity to talk about it to you today. So thank you for your time. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Frank. And before I hand it over to Susan, I just want to prepare the folks who are here. We're going to go immediately into your questions rather than have some of the questions that we've thought about beforehand, because I really do want to encourage a dialogue between you who've taken the time out of your day to come here and this distinguished panel. So Susan Solovic is the small business expert. And not only is she the small business expert, but her expertise is distributed throughout the entire United States with her partnership with the SBE Council. And it's truly impressive, the guidance that you provide to small business owners. I would say that Susan also has just this great ability to talk with small business owners almost every single day and glean from them both their challenges and the opportunities that we can help with in Washington, D.C. So Susan, thank you for being on the panel, and we'll hear from you and then take questions from the audience.
Okay, thank you, Tom. And I don't have any data. I'm not a statistician, but I pay attention closely to all this good information that comes out here in Washington, D.C. And then I have the unique vantage point of going out on the road and talking with real entrepreneurs who are facing these challenges every single day, and it's scary. I can listen in a room like this. People don't stop talking about how their businesses are suffering no matter how hard they work. They suffer from regulations. And get this, we talk about federal regulation, and hopefully some of that's going to be wiped off the books. But where it gets scary is when then their state regs say to do it differently or maybe a little bit different understanding. Same with the local thing. Now that's redundancy over and over again, which is cutting into their time, their productivity, and their profitability, and they're already squeezed with their profit margins at this point in time. They're barely making ends meet. I was talking to a gentleman who runs a carpet business. He's been in business for 30 years, has always done well, but yet his profit margin used to be about 65%. It's down to 34%. He doesn't know how much longer he's going to be able to keep his doors open. and he wanted to leave it to his family. I hear complaints about the estate tax causing small businesses owners that wanted to leave their legacy to their heirs having to close the door because there wasn't money to pay the tax. Or one lady, and I won't say the company name, but it was very large and employed thousands of women. And when her father passed away, she had to go raise capital on a road show in order to hold the doors open. That's not what her father wanted to leave as that legacy. I've watched it as an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, except for one stint in corporate world and one stint practicing law, but we won't talk about that. And I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. And my parents ran a funeral home, and some of you, I suspect, are old enough in this room to remember when funeral homes ran the ambulance service. Well, I grew up in a little town of 3,000 people. My parents had a handful of employees, and when they get an ambulance call, they'd simply put the cot in the back of the hearse, and off they'd go. And when it was a funeral, the cot would come out and the casket would go in. Well, the Department of Labor came in and audited my parents and decided that whenever the stretcher was in the hearse, it was an ambulance subject to federal overtime laws. But if there was a casket in there, it wasn't subject. So after days of talking to the employees and looking over my parents' book, this gentleman, who I think had no understanding of the funeral business whatsoever, extrapolated how much back pay and interest my parents owed their employees. And when my parents said no, they met with the employees and said, and here's how you sue them and we will help you. Well, no one ever did, thankfully. But the very next week, my father closed the ambulance business. We couldn't afford it. A lot of times in the country, he didn't even get paid. And so that community, that little town of 3,000 people, went for a year without ambulance service. No one understands the unintended consequences, the jobs that are lost because of these stifling regulations that someone in an ivory tower dreams up. And they sound good in theory, but when produced in practice, they're killing small businesses. And I want to touch on a couple of things you all said too, because I'm writing a book called The 1% Edge, how small changes guarantee relevancy and sustain success in your business. And it's really a process that I developed to help businesses create innovation in their DNA, not just in every product and service that comes to market, but in their people, their process, their systems, their infrastructure, their marketing, their customer service. It all has to be supported and constantly being innovative. But one of the other things that I hear from talking to business owners is they can't find the talent that they need to come into their businesses and build this innovation that's going to help create more jobs. And I just finished reading a book. I would recommend it to you. It's called The Disengagement Crisis. And it is how disengaged our workforce is today. And without engagement, with this young group of workers coming onto our businesses, how can we ever get innovative and vision and to increase profitability and to really do something that we're proud of? We do have a crisis of engagement in this country, and that's costing us our ability to be innovative. I hope that our policymakers will recognize that. I hope our elected officials will recognize that. And I'm sure you all have heard the story that when Senator McGovern left public service, he went into upstate New York, I think it was, and opened a little business, and he failed. And afterwards he said, if only I had known what it was like at that time, he said, I would have been certainly a better leader and a much better presidential candidate. So walk a mile in our shoes the next time you think about a regulation, and think about that small person who's in southern Missouri struggling to keep the doors open, and hopefully you'll help us help the country.
Well, thank you, Susan. We certainly have a distinguished panel. You've heard a little snapshot not only of what they're doing, but some of their core beliefs and the passion behind their advocacy efforts. With that, let's take a few questions.
Can I, since I have a microphone in my hand?
Yes. Well, Karen, how about a question?
Yeah, thank you. You know, just a general question, and any member of the panel can answer this, but is there anything in the culture in terms of, a change in the culture where we have this dearth in entrepreneurship? I think, the numbers have been huge, particularly for younger entrepreneurs, that there are far fewer, far younger people starting businesses. So that's a question on the culture. More risk averse? Are people more risk averse? And then, Susan, you also brought up something about, business owners having a really difficult time and maybe sharing with, members of their family. Well, this is not something I want you to do. Sort of like, doctors, telling their, don't be a doctor. Well, don't be a business owner. So I just want to know if you could, maybe talk about the culture and what needs to happen, I think, or something happening, in the culture to stop, people from starting businesses beyond the policy issues and the state of the economy. So
This is a lightning round. I hit the green button first on the mic. I think, Karen, what I've seen over the past several years is the attitude coming from Washington, D.C. is anti-risk. And there's good reason for this, I think. And that is that there were, to kick off the Great Recession, as Ray was referencing, there were some risky things going on that collapsed our market. Now, is that the cause of everything? No. But part of the consequence of that was a specific policy direction from Washington, D.C. that was against risk. And that had a trickle-down effect onto folks who may have had a thought or an idea or a business plan that risk is no longer good. And everyone on this panel believes that risk from an entrepreneur perspective is something to be embraced, applauded, and supported. It's actually part of what makes America such a great country is its embracement not only of success, but of failure. Sets us apart from European countries, for instance. So I think that's changing, but we've got a long way to go before we shift the mentality from Washington against risk to embracing risk with precautions that make sure that too much risk might be bad, but no risk, as I think John referenced, could be disastrous.
I was going to say, in part, like you said, like you mentioned, the numbers in terms of entrepreneurship and so forth. From our perspective, from SBA, is and the leadership from our administrator is we're not taking it for granted. And what I mean by that is that we're SBA and everybody knows who SBA is. So one of the things that she has announced recently is the Ignite Tour. And part of that is to reach out and go across the country to all 68 district offices and really ignite and really listen to what are the challenges not only on regulation, but what are the things that we can assist from SBA that and guide them through that through our resource partners, but also if they didn't know about us, that they recognize those that want to take the risk and the entrepreneurship, the tools that we have available for them. So that's one of the goals that the administrator that we're going to be pushing out across the country.
If I can, our education system, I think, plays a big role in this. I taught MBA students for 10 years. The good news on the entrepreneurship front is that so many schools now have entrepreneurship majors, undergrad, graduate. That's the good news. On the other side, again, I'm teaching MBA students, and they came into my class, and I'm, Mr. Positive on entrepreneurship and free markets and free enterprise, and it was like I was talking a foreign language to them, because I think, quite frankly, over their full education from elementary school on up, that was not the message that they received about business and businessmen and women. It was largely a negative message. And these, again, were MBA students. So I think there's a real challenge in our education system to emphasize the importance of free enterprise and entrepreneurship.
John?
I'll just add one quick thing. We polled millennials last year and asked them about entrepreneurship in particular. We found some really interesting things. One is that they want to be entrepreneurs. They aspire to be entrepreneurs. They think highly of entrepreneurship. They think of friends of theirs who are connected to startups as successful. So there's a real brand equity that entrepreneurship has for that generation, while at the same time, as Karen mentioned, millennials are on tracked to be the least entrepreneurial generation on record, which is startling. But there's a rational reason for that. When you look at the economy that they inherited, it's a pretty bad economy. Many of them came of age during the financial crisis. They entered the job market at a really terrible time. They are the most indebted generation in terms of student loans. So these are all things that make it really hard to take risks, make it a lot easier to take the path of incumbency or least resistance. And then the nature of the financial crisis itself in terms of some of the generational things. Home equity is one of the key places for startup capital. Personal savings, personal lines of credit, all these things got wiped out during the crisis, and it took a long time for that to come back. So you combine those factors with the generational factor of, I think, particularly student loan debt. Those are some rational reasons to be risk averse, and I think, again, that gets back to policymaking. What can we do to remove some of those impediments, make it easier to take the kind of healthy risks that we know are so important for the economy? Because I think the good news is there, for the most part, and this shows up in poll after poll, millennials want to be entrepreneurs and they admire entrepreneurs. So let's make it easier for them to do that.
Thank you, Susan.
So I read a poll recently about grade schoolers and their interest in entrepreneurship, and it has dropped down significantly too. So there is the beginning. That's the platform. I mean, I can remember when I was growing up, I was always figuring out ways to make money. It was cool. You know, I liked having my own stuff. But now we're living in a society where if you just show up, whatever, you're going to get a participation award anyway. You know, don't have to work harder than anybody else. I mean, I'll tell you right now, it has nothing to do with being in small business, but I was third runner-up to Miss America. You know what? That was pretty cool. But guess what, folks? I lost. Somebody else won. We got to drive that point home. You either work hard enough and you go for it and you build something, and we've got to reignite the American dream. And there should be nothing wrong in this country with working hard and building wealth. We should not feel guilty for that. Never.
So I just add very briefly, clearly access to capital, is a big issue of the changing environment in terms of the economy, big issue. We do a global IP index, which charts the IP environment in 44 different countries. What we're seeing is that our current patent system in the United States is ranking number 10. What that means is that investors are less willing to invest in some cases because of the uncertainty around patent protection. If you watch Shark Tank, one of the first questions you're hearing almost every show is, do you have a patent? But then you have all these folks who wind up being thrust into a new world where there are threats from patent trolls, where there are new types of risks for startup companies. And a lot of times these folks are going to take a look at their situation and say, is it worth it for me to put myself on the line and really try to go out and make a go of something when there are so many risks? We had an opportunity to brief the Small Business Committee on a wonderful American success story that unfortunately went bust. A lady who started out designing wedding dresses. She became incredibly successful. She was so successful, of course, that people started copying her, ripping her off. And when people went online to buy her dresses, 9 times out of 10, they were getting a counterfeit. And it was a shoddy piece of junk. And so her business suffered to the extent that after having spent so much of her day trying to fight this problem, that she ultimately had to throw up her hands and say, I'm no longer doing what I love. I'm no longer pursuing my dream. And the small business that employs under 10 people is now going to close its doors. So I think a lot of times it's just folks saying, is it really worth it? And am I going to have that access to capital to make a go of it?
Thank you, Frank. I'm looking around for other questions, and Christy has a mic in the back. While we're waiting for a question, I'll also add to what Alan said, and that is the Administrators Ignite Tour. I think its primary purpose, from the way Alan described it, is to listen to the challenges and opportunities facing entrepreneurs. It also has a great consequence, and that is that Linda McMahon wants to empower the people she meets with and give them the encouragement, knowing that there are thousands, potentially millions of their peers around the country who are fighting for them. And then when she comes back to Washington, D.C., there's an entire administration fighting for them too. I was with her in Pennsylvania earlier this week, and that was the feeling that these small business owners in a recovering mining town in Pennsylvania left with. They had tons of challenges, but they also really felt as though their people in Washington, D.C. who are fighting for them and trying to remove a lot of the barriers that we're talking about here on this panel.
Yeah, I had a question about the FTC initiative that you were talking about with licensing and any push down to the local level. Because as a lawyer and MBA who helps companies, some of the biggest problems are the fact that they put in an application for a license and the person looking at it sees a problem on page 2, sends it back. They fix page 2, send it back. There's a problem on page 3, send it back. And then every time they send it back to the licensing the local licensing enterprise, then it's put back at the end of the stack. And so it literally took 8 months for somebody before they came to me and said, "Can you help me get my license?"
So let's have any of the panel answer the licensing and credentialing
Well,
opportunities.
You know, I totally agree with you, and it is. I mean, it's keeping people from getting into businesses, no doubt about it. The FTC acting chairwoman is going to be here shortly, and she's going to specifically address what's being done in that area. So if you're going to be with us, she's probably the best equipped to answer.
So thank you. We're going to put that question on hold, but we'll prepare the Commissioner Olhausen to answer it. And I thank you for folks being here.
The only thing I was going to add is, John mentioned, and you touched on the state and local aspect of it, and I'll put a little plug in for SBE Council here. Look at our Small Business Policy Index, where we rank the states according to 55 measures, I believe we're up to now, on state and local issues, and we have our Small Business Tax Index that just came out a week or two ago. So, here we are in Washington, and obviously this matters a lot to entrepreneurs, but John's absolutely right. When you go down to the state and local level, there are tremendous obstacles and burdens there. So if you want to get a flavor of where your state is, please take a look at those.
And I would just add to it, back in like the 1950s, only like 5% of occupations needed licensing. Now it's like 25, 30%. So it just keeps going up. And you should go online sometime and look at all and they're different in each state. If you're a valet parker in West Virginia, you have to have a license. I mean, seriously.
So hopefully Maureen Olhausen will talk a little bit about this later in the program. But please join me in a round of applause for this great panel.
Thank you, panel, and thank you, Tom. Real quickly, we're going to move some of those chairs off the stage for the next panel. So you just give us a couple of minutes, and then we'll be joined by Christy Arslan and Eric Curl, who will give us the real story as entrepreneurs. So a couple of minutes. Thank you.
What's great about small business is every small business owner has a great story. Isn't that true?
Having a quick conversation.
There you go. Oh, well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Oh, yeah. Everyone, if you can kind of move back over this way again, please. We're going to keep going with the program.
There he is. He's coming. He's coming. I know.
Okay, so everybody, we're getting get started again. And just before in the last panel, which thanks to everyone for joining us and being part of that, we were talking about the lack of risk taking, risk aversion, the lack of innovation. And as I said, every entrepreneur, every small business owner has a great story to share. And we're very excited today that Christy Arslan and Eric Cole are here to tell and share some of their stories and insights and give us a little inspiration. So take it away, you guys.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you everybody for taking the time to listen to Eric and I, just two entrepreneurs up here that are wanted to talk a little bit about our story and share some of the barriers that we are facing in our business, and we also hear from other small business owners when it comes to issues affecting our ability to both start up and grow our business. I'll start by introducing myself and saying a little bit about Eric, and then we're going to kick off a conversation, and at some point we'd love to get any questions or feedback from all of you. So as mentioned, I'm Christy Arslan, and I am the co-owner of Pop Republic Gourmet Popcorn. It's a gourmet popcorn company here in the DC metro area. I own it with my husband. So that's a fun business. We started it about 5 years ago. We own a gourmet popcorn store. We have a food truck here in DC, so any local residents may have seen it around town. And we also do quite a bit of catering. And this was a big venture for us. And I'm also a member of SBE Council. And in that capacity, I act as SBE Council's entrepreneur in residence, helping give small business feedback on policy issues and give my 2 cents on different things and how it may impact the smallest businesses out there. And we're really happy to hear today to have Eric Cole here. He is a serial entrepreneur. He's the founder of Idea Buyer and ideabuyer.com. He founded Idea Buyer his junior year at Ohio State University and has gone on to start a number of companies focused on helping entrepreneurs bring their ideas to market. He also has worked in the access to capital space with a company called Fundable, and we're really happy to have you here. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you very much. One of the things that I'd like to say is just thank you to Karen Kerrigan and the entire SBE Council team for putting this together and giving me the opportunity to share our insights. A little bit about Idea Buyer and my background. I started the company 10 years ago, and since then we've grown to over 30 team members and over 40 if you included full-time equivalents. And we have over 3,000 people per month that contact us looking for help bringing their startup to market. And during that time, we've had a great purview of both the excitement around starting your business and also the challenges that entrepreneurs face. Last year, we were 197 on the Inc. 500, so we are the 197th fastest growing privately owned company in the United States. We're a debt-free company. We have a large amount of passion from our team members, and I want to say hi to them. They're probably watching. And they were very excited about this, and this is my wife, Lindsay, and also our COO, Gary. And I say our company because every single person in our team is integral to growing and helping startups. And I think it's something that sharing our insights with the councils is going to be helpful in terms of what we've seen to be scalable and repeatable and trackable for the investment. And when we talk about help for entrepreneurs and small businesses, I want to be clear that what opinions I have, and also we've talked a lot. We actually helped to raise money for quite a few entrepreneurs 3 or 4 years ago when we all partnered up to do a contest in terms of raising capital for small businesses. in terms of what they need and where we can help them. And it's not entrepreneurial socialism. We're looking at it as an investment in the future of this country. So I am excited to share what we have.
Thank you. And I would say Pop Republic's on the other end of the spectrum. We're very small. We started out with just my husband and I, and now we have 7 employees. We were really excited. We hit our 5-year anniversary in May, and we hit over $650,000 in revenue. So we were very excited about that. And we are in the process of looking for growth opportunities. Now that we're at the stage of proving our concept and proving the market, we're looking to see how we can grow and what options we have out there. So in talking about that, I always think, there are 4 legs of a stool for any entrepreneur, whether it's a big business or a small business. These 4 legs are critical to both startup and success. And they're taxes, healthcare, regulation, and access to capital. So those 4 things are so crucial to an entrepreneur and to a business owner as they're looking to grow their business. And we're going to hit on some of those today. And so I wanted to prompt the conversation, Eric, by just asking you as a business owner and also in your work with other entrepreneurs, what have you found is one of the biggest barrier to entrepreneurship and growth?
Sure. So I would definitely say access to capital is one of the number one areas that is a big hurdle. We have 3,000 to 4,000 people that contact us per month looking to start a business. And through those, we work with less than 1%. And the obstacles they face range from access to capital to business planning, not having the resources, the education, to a variety of different hurdles. And access to capital is one that often stops people from moving forward at a critical junction in their business. So, for example, we have a number of entrepreneurs on a monthly basis that we will generate demand for. There may be a large retailer. These are some of the top 100 retailers across the country, and they have demand for the product, but they can't afford to go forward with the manufacturing run. They can't get the financing because they don't fit the traditional mold of being able to get a bank loan. So the access to capital is a huge obstacle, and what ends up happening is we end up in some cases we've contributed to production runs and things of that nature, but there would be so much more economic activity even just from what we are doing, and if there were more opportunities through the organizations to help entrepreneurs that are kind of in that in between range from startup to small business, not ready to necessarily take on an SBA loan. They already have a business, but they need production run financing and be able to help them fulfill demand. That's a huge area for them.
I think that's one of the biggest things that I underestimated as an entrepreneur was the access to capital component. I knew about taxes, of course. We all prepared for that. I knew that dealing with getting our own health benefits, transitioning from an employer-based job, and also I was prepared for the regulation and just getting the business up and running with the licensing and all of that. I was prepared to deal with all of those barriers. But the biggest barrier that I was just unprepared for was how hard it was to get funding for your business. We had planned, we started our business with both our own personal funds. So like many business owners, they bootstrap it. They use money from their savings. We use the equity in our home, as we talked about earlier. And then we also went out and tried to work to get an SBA loan. We were lucky, we were successful, but we were only successful because I happen to know about great resources like SCORE and the small business development centers that the SBA operated, and was able to hook up with a business counselor to really walk us through the process. And what I think one of the biggest disparities is, oftentimes I think groups or SBA in particular wants to encourage business owners to apply, but don't necessarily highlight how intense and difficult the process is. It was very challenging. It took us over a year to go through the business planning process and prepping everything for our loan. And I think having that education on the front end would really be of value to business owners so that they can really prepare about what they're going to need. I mean, we needed everything from the specs of our equipment to the layout of our store to a 30-page marketing plan for them to even consider our loan application. So it was a real difficult process. And now that we're growing, and we paid off our SBA loan 2 years ahead of schedule, we're still having trouble from the bank that we got the SBA loan for and paid off early, getting additional capital to take the next step and open a second location. So I think that was one of the biggest challenges that I underestimated. What have you been hearing from some of the business owners? You mentioned funding for for manufacturing or for supply. What other kinds of issues are they facing dealing with traditional lending institutions?
So one of the largest obstacles is that these entrepreneurs don't have the experience or education or resources to be able to go through the process of submitting the business plan. So if there's a very rigid process currently with a lot of the programs that are out there, and what ends up happening is they just don't know what to do next. And so unless you hold their hand, and so there's this big gap. It's kind of this desert where you have a great oasis and energy, and then they just don't know what to do next to get to. Everyone says they want their product, or you have entrepreneurs. We have an entrepreneur, for example, that has a health food product, and she continues to sell out her inventory. She can't keep up with demand, but she can't get financing for larger runs. And so she's one of those entrepreneurs that falls in there that unless there's something that someone jumps in and really helps get to that next point, she won't be able to grow faster. And this comes up time and time again, and we see that happen repeatedly. And so I think part of it is that oftentimes it is from a top-down perspective versus a bottom-up of how to help entrepreneurs or help get them financing. And we look for people that say, oh, yeah, well, your business plan. Well, for a lot of entrepreneurs, that business plan first is not going to offer, it's based on projections and them just putting numbers down. That's not actually based upon demand necessarily. And so one of the items that I think would be fantastic in terms of policy is helping out entrepreneurs who actually have demand and basing some of that financing and making it easier when you have demand from a reliable company to be able to get that faster and not have all the hurdles of having the business plan and all of these things that take a long time to get through, which you shared took you over a year.
And I think I've noticed, and I think one of the, I guess, my recommendations for policymakers out there is that we've started to see a growth of online lenders and also alternative lending that help kind of fit those needs. And I think making sure that we have policy that supports that growth that will help smaller businesses, because I think, as you said, with a lot of the traditional lending institutions, it's often top down. They have all these formulas. They're looking at just the numbers and not also taking into consideration the business owner. And also I think more education on the SBA side would help. And crowdfunding has been also a great resource for businesses or ideas to kind of get off the ground, and equity crowdfunding, allowing investors to invest in small business through equity crowdfunding, so helping change some of the SEC rules that would help open that up.
Yep, absolutely. And so with the small businesses as well, the education standpoint, being able to help, we have so many people we'd love to send somewhere to different resources. The problem is a lot of the resources are so antiquated and haven't been updated to deal with technology and to deal with the economy as it currently is. And so sending them to these resources actually doesn't help them, could move them backwards, especially on the government side. And so I think it's critically important that things start to get updated, that we have a path for entrepreneurs that doesn't include all the red tape, that rewards entrepreneurs who are successful and continues to help them succeed. Most businesses will fail in the first 5 years. It'd be a really good investment to get behind the ones that don't, right? The ones that are successful, and have start to get behind them. And a lot of times when people start to raise money from these sources, when they get frustrated from not being able to raise capital, they go out and raise money from angel investors or VCs, and they don't know what the terms are, right? And so it also causes issues there, or they'll take on PO financing from a lender that they're paying 20% on, and it starts to inhibit it. To have that space where we are banking on and helping entrepreneurs in a very credible way, and they know that they can go to these resources, and when they do have demand, when they do have traction, and that's the key thing, is focusing on entrepreneurs. When they generate traction, getting behind them, I think Washington really needs to step up and help supporting those entrepreneurs.
Couldn't agree more. I want to segue actually into something that one of our previous panelists said, Susan Solovic, who mentioned unintended consequences, because one of the other learning processes that I've learned in starting my small business is how, what might be done with the best intentions can have a lot of unintended consequences, and particularly with small business owners who don't have a legal team, don't have an accounting team, don't have an HR team to try and address those issues. Having policy and regulations really make sure our policymakers look at the small business perspective is critical. I'll talk a little bit about regulation. A perfect example for our business was this obscure regulation that I wouldn't have known about if I wasn't part of SBE Council, called the Joint Employer Rule, which basically was a ruling from the NLRB that impacted franchisees, saying that if there's an issue in a franchise with labor law issues and someone sues, that they can actually sue the brand. So you're pretty much opening yourself up to so much more liability. And franchising is one of the way my husband and I are looking at potentially growing our business. And when we learn more about this rule and that we could really open ourselves up to more significant liability, we pretty much put it on hold and made the choice to try and open one store at a time, which we had control over because we were just so concerned. I mean, one lawsuit could put us, our growing business, out of business. So a perfect example of an unintended consequence. Have you, in terms of your work with entrepreneurs or in your business, experienced unintended consequences with a particular policy or regulation?
Yes, actually. So actually this year we had a policy that was an act that was about 20 years old that overlapped in terms of helping people with new products, being able to bring them to market. And even though it was baseless and it ended up being dismissed, and it was brought about though, and it provided the opportunity for an attorney who, one of his recent cases included suing Old Spice for irritating some men's armpits. Not kidding. And it ended up costing us over $100,000 just in legal fees. And so that was something that could have been money back into the business to hire additional employees. It was a tremendous amount of stress. Again, we have about 40 families, including FTEs, 30 full-time employees that rely on us. And those are families that I take that as a very serious responsibility. And so, until those kind of policies in gray area where it overlaps, the impact of that is substantial. Mm-hmm. And I think that isn't talked about enough, but it had a very serious impact on our business this year.
And I think it underscores the importance of entrepreneurship education. Again, I wouldn't have known about that particular rule if it wasn't for my membership in the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council. But there's so many, I just think as a business owner, we have called upon the resources that are out there so many times in our business to help us at every step in the way. Our local Small Business Development Center in Alexandria linked us up with a program with Virginia Tech MBA students. They helped us create an entire system to manage our cost of goods. We've, SBA district offices, SCORE, all of the associations. I'm an avid joiner of business associations, and all of the information I get there has been so vital to our success in our little gourmet popcorn shop. But in terms of your work, both in your business and working with business owners, what do you see in terms of access to entrepreneurship and education, and where do you see the gaps there?
So there are a lot of gaps. I think that it's very well intended. The intentions are good on some of the regulations. With being able to hire people, some of the consequences that can come up through that for entrepreneurs. The biggest thing is actual tactical things that you can use. So everyone had great suggestions up here in terms of policy, and everyone agrees that we need to help entrepreneurs. But the actual items of what we're going to do to actually make that happen and some next steps is lacking. And so, it's great to talk about the general and broad strokes of how we need to do things for entrepreneurs, but the tactical action items are really missing, and it needs to be more functional and based on results and getting out there. And the education doesn't need to be, we're going to have a business plan workshop. It needs to be, having office hours to help those entrepreneurs, and not just providing a stipend to someone because they meet with an entrepreneur and the entrepreneur signs a form that somebody met with them and that's how they get comped. There should be incentive beyond that. There should be incentive to invest in startups. I mean, the fact that if a high earner that's a W-2 invests in a startup, loses their money, and they can't write that loss off in the same manner is a huge hurdle. I mean, it prevents a lot of people from investing in startups. There are a lot of different items that would encourage so much investment, encouraging employees to hire people, and giving tax incentives to hire more employees. All those little items that really start to add up. And
we'll have to save workforce issues for another day, because workforce is another big issue for our business, and I know a lot others. We're wrapping up, and we want to take at least one question from an audience member, but I want to conclude in thanking Eric, but also in hoping that our personal stories would help you think a little bit about some of the policy and regulations out there, how it's impacting us on the ground. Also, we encourage you to work with groups like SBE Council to get that small business feedback and find out how small businesses are going to be impacted from different issues and regulation. But we're really happy to be here. So if there's any questions for Eric or I, we're happy to take it.
Hi, I work in the securities crowdfunding field, and it seems to me like a gourmet popcorn shop would be absolutely ideal for revenue share bonds. How do we get out the word? Because so many entrepreneurs don't know that that's even a thing. How do we get out the word to them that this is a thing they could take advantage of?
And that's a good point. In fact, I just participated in I just watched a webinar about that, because I've heard of crowdfunding, I've heard about Kickstarter, and it wasn't until my participation with Karen and her group about equity crowdfunding that I started to learn it. I think it's critically important to go through organizations like Karen, who have a network of business owners, to get the word out, but also working with the SBA resources like SCORE, SBDC, and Women Business Centers to begin educating the entrepreneurs on the ground about that as a viable funding opportunity for your business. And I will be looking into that for our next stage of growth.
And to add on that, Karen was very early on when we did the partnership to raise money for a whole host of entrepreneurs, and she is definitely right at the forefront when we did that. And so she is SBA Council is doing a great job.
Thank you.
You guys did a fantastic job. Thank you so much. Everyone join me in thanking Christy and Eric. Look like we have a lot of work to do to get more educational information out there. So, and we're going to just go right to the next panel, correct? Okay, good.
That's correct. Great. I want to say, though, we've been talking about the lack of entrepreneurial enthusiasm. We have one I think the youngest entrepreneur here with us today. Sabrina, you want to stand up? She has her own pet sitting business and loves dogs. So here's an up-and-comer. She might be the next Bill Gates or something, huh? Go for it. She's Karen's niece, too. She's adorable.
Of course.
So I would like to say, when we were talking about IP on the earlier panel, one of the things I think that happens is, as a small business owner, we get passionate about what we really love and want to do, and we just start going for it. And the barrier to entry to starting a small business today has dramatically been lessened. I mean, I can remember the first business I ever started, a serious business. I had to go to the library and look up information, and now it's all at our fingertips. You can sit in, I always say, in your bathrobe and your bunny slippers in your spare bedroom and do business around the globe. So it's very, very important, and that's why this next panel is so critical. Tools for opportunity, broadband everywhere, opportunity everywhere. And Ray Keating is going to be talking with the FCC Commissioner Mike O'Reilly. Thanks.
Susan, thanks so much. Telecom, internet, broadband, all of these issues have been critical for the SBE Council for more than 2 decades, and obviously essential to the well-being of small businesses and entrepreneurs around the country. And it's on both sides. It's not just about small businesses as consumers, if you will, but also providers in the telecommunications arena. When you look at some of the numbers, the broadest look at telecommunications, 83% of employers have less than 20 workers. So it's very much about small businesses on that end as well. I'm so honored and we are privileged to have Commissioner Mike O'Reilly from the FCC with us today. Thank you so much for being here, Commissioner.
Thank you very much.
And I thought what we do is dive right into questions, and then we'll go to the audience. The first one, our panels earlier, we were talking about the challenges of entrepreneurship and being a small business owner. I'd love to hear what perspectives you have on entrepreneurship, the need for better policies to encourage small business growth and entrepreneurship from where you sit.
Well, thank you so very much for having me. When I think of your question, a couple of things come to mind. One, I should state, right from the beginning, that I am a firm believer in American capitalism. I think that's how we approach these issues. I work as a regulator today. It's a tough word to say, I must admit. I work at a regulatory agency. I do not employ people. I do not create jobs. I do not produce a payroll. And I do not bring goods or services to market. That is the amazing part of the American economy, where private sector companies do that on a daily basis. And so I applaud all those that are in this sphere that do all of those things for the benefit of all the rest of us Americans. So thank you very much for that part of it. But when I think about things and how does it play into my job at the Commission, your point is very well taken, that small businesses are the heart of telecommunications industry, or the larger telecom and tech industry, certainly becoming more important on the tech side, even though there are very large companies. So when I approach these issues, I try to figure out, how do our regulations impact the small business? What is the barrier to entry? How can we adjust those things? Can we layer down so that everyone has a fair shake at the market? What I'm most interested in is, I think the previous comment made from the panelists, how can you encourage small business? Right now, I'm spending a great deal of my time trying to remove those barriers to prevent small businesses from growing, to prevent small businesses from starting up, rather than trying to encourage, trying to scrap bad policy that's already in place at the Commission in our rules today.
Along those lines with the Commission, there seems to be a shift in terms of how you're doing business, if you will, at the Commission, with a greater eye on the impact on small businesses and entrepreneurs, but also just, how is the changes that you're making there from an operational standpoint? Talk about that a little bit and how that matters to the small business community.
Well, let's face it, the November election had many different outcomes, and the Commission's structural setup. We are a 3-2 organization with the administration having 3 seats compared to 2 seats. So in the last structure, I can honestly say that I lost all big ticket votes. And this go around, I'm having more success. There is a new chairman, my good friend Chairman Pai, and he's done a wonderful job setting a tone for the agency in terms of how we approach issues, but then also tackling a number of the burdens that I previously discussed in my previous answer, removing those barriers to investment, to capital formation, and providing certainty to the marketplace for telecommunications and tech industry going forward. So there is a fresh breath of air at the commission. I think we're looking at everything with a new light. I would honestly say that the last commission, and many of those folks have moved on to different things, and many of them are my friends in the capacity that you can be friends at a regulatory agency. But you know, they didn't approach the issues with the idea that there is a cost to everything that they did. They just gradually accepted the fact that that was just part of doing business. And so if it was a little bit here and a little bit here and a little bit more here and a little bit more burden here, that didn't seem to bother them. And every time you'd raise the issue and go, there's a cumulative effect of everything you're doing in terms of what it means for entrepreneurs and what it means for businesses to be able to grow. And they didn't see that exactly that way. They saw it as like, well, this is a really good policy. And you say, great, but you just staple together 8 different policies, and most of the businesses that you deal with have very few people that can handle the regulatory rigmarole in Washington, D.C. They don't have huge departments to deal with these things, and they just didn't see it that way. And so I think you're seeing a new approach from a new commission that's firmly in the mindset of small businesses and what it means for job creation.
I like a lot of what you have to say here as an economist and also as an entrepreneur. How do you get a regulatory body, though, to make that shift? I mean, the years that I've been involved in this, we're always regulating in the rearview mirror. When you have an industry that's so dynamic like this, what are some of the basic principles that you're perhaps trying to instill across the agency that will help this?
Well, and that complements, my good friend, the chairman, who he and I have advocated for many years now that we, the commission, approach issues and actually do the cost-benefit analysis to determine what are the impacts of our policies. And we don't do that today in a very thoughtful way. We haven't done that in the past, notwithstanding promises to do so. The work, if you read any of our items, you would see how flippant and how thin the writing was on cost-benefit analysis. They can quantify a cost of something, but then they would always, at every moment, say, but the societal good of this policy outweighs any of the cost. And so we're trying to change that. And the chairman's moved forward, and we're going to create a new office of economics and data analysis to help interpret and do the quantifiable work here, so we can look at the data and make a better decision going forward. So that means there'll be policies that probably won't make the cut. In the past, there never were. Every policy always was, the benefit always exceeded the cost, no matter what it was. So it's instilling that into our everyday activities and requiring that every item go through that process, in my opinion, is really important. And it's just necessary for an agency. Other agencies are in the administration have to do that by law. FDA, name the agency they have to. We don't. As an independent regulatory agency, we don't today. Promises were made that we would. We never did. So I'm excited about what it's going to take us a little time to ramp up to get that fully operational. I accept that fate. But when we do, I really think it's going to be important to understand the implications. Because as I highlighted in the previous question, most businesses don't have huge compliant regulatory offices to try and figure out how do you deal with the FCC. What are the assumptions that we would make? We'd say, well, we looked at the policy and it requires one person 2 hours a year of their time, and we equate that at the average lawyer it's $80. So the cost for a business is $160. Well, that's not how businesses operate. Even from the small to bottom, many people look at an item in terms of compliance. You're talking factors of 4, 5, 6 times that to comply with our rules. So I'm hopeful that such a policy in terms of doing thoughtful, quantitative cost-benefit analysis will be really beneficial. Make sure we don't install policies that are harmful to job growth and economic development.
And you talked about unwinding, if you will, or rolling back or stopping. What are some of the previous or current policies that have impeded, for example, broadband deployment?
Sure, I'll give. I mean, obviously, most people have heard of the issue of net neutrality. That is something we have an open proceeding that we're going to look at later this fall. I don't have an exact time on that. The chairman gets to determine the exact date, but sometime at this fall. And there's been numerous studies and examinations on terms of its impact in terms of capital formation and investment and regulatory certainty and the willingness for carriers to build out their network. But I'll mention two others just because that's been so well talked about. I'll mention two others. One is the previous commission's desire to favor municipal-owned networks. So this is to figure out how to, preempt state rules that that I've looked at, that many people have looked at and said, gee, that makes an awful lot of sense. The state made a rule to require a business plan from a municipal network, for instance. They actually required that you had a business plan. That's such a high barrier, right? Incredible. The commission wanted to strike that down and say that's got to go. That's a barrier to entry, and we've got to let municipal networks grow. And at the same time, we know what municipal networks are going to do. One, they're going to use tax dollars to compete with the private sector, and two, they're going to squish out the marketplace and squish out what can be done going forward. And they're going to put taxpayer dollars at risk, and many of them have turned out to be quite dubious successes, and many of them have turned out to be complete failures. The second area, and it's something that Chairman and I have spent a great deal of time, certainly high on my priority list, is removing those barriers from state and local governments that have proven to be actual barriers to the deployment by the private sector for networks and expanding broadband to all Americans. We have two major categories in this case. Some state and local governments and tribal governments are imposing moratoria or de facto moratoria in terms of the installation of new networks, whether it be wireless or wireline. That's a cost of doing business, and every day it's being slowed down. I was in New Orleans it's probably been 3 weeks now. There's 100 wireless installations that have already been deployed throughout the city in the less economically developed parts of New Orleans that are just sitting there waiting for electric power. But the power company and the mayor are pointing at each other saying, oh, that's your problem. Oh, it's not a big problem. In the meantime, these things are just sitting on power on the wires, ready to deliver service today to provide second, maybe 2, 3, 4 times the speeds that the consumers are getting today. And that's being delayed, stopped in its tracks because of bad decision-making and bad procedures in the community. That's harmful. And the second part is there's this great, examination from a state, local, tribal government that, the deployment of wireless networks means an opportunity to extract dollars from these highly profitable companies. How do I put my hand out? How do I get more money from these on a per site basis? And as we go to small cell networks, where you're talking, a factor of 10 to even more deployments than you have in terms of macro towers that you see today that dot the landscape. You're talking, they're trying to treat them as all the same as the macro towers. And that dollar is coming out of the consumer pocket one way or the other. So there's a couple examples to give you things that we're working on today to hopefully recognize what needs to be done to expand broadband in our nation.
Well, you hit on one of the things I was going to talk about was the future networks, 5G and so on. What about the rural broadband situation? I mean, obviously, the emphasis with Chairman Pai has been expand broadband access to everyone. Tell us more about what can happen to make that a greater reality in the rural communities.
Like the chairman, I am committed to try and bring broadband available to all Americans that have interest. There's certainly a population of citizens that don't have interest, and I'm not forcing broadband upon them, but for those that do have interest and are facing no service, dial-up service, or substandard service, we're trying to figure out how best to incite private sector companies to bring service to those areas. It's not easy. It's been something we've been working on for a number of years. We run, the commission runs a $4.5 billion high-cost fund for this purpose today. Those funds have been going out on a yearly basis, and we've been adding to them and modifying our programs and updating our programs to make them more precise and more effective. They're never going to be perfect because it is government making some of these decisions rather than the marketplace, but we are accepting fate that we have to figure out how to make it economical and bring some incentives to those areas where it just doesn't make sense for private sector to invest solely. So we're putting our dollars behind that to expand those networks. We're trying to put as many market ideas into the system as possible. For instance, we're using reverse auctions for purposes of driving down the cost to serve a particular area. And so that hopefully will be beneficial. The second part is trying to take advantage of all technologies. I certainly would love, every consumer to have fiber to their door and full-on wireless service and everything that they would like. That's probably not going to happen. We're not probably going to be able to have fiber everywhere in the United States. There are many parts that are more rural, as you highlighted, and we have some geography difficulties given the mountainous regions in the west and in the east that make it very difficult to lay fiber. That's when you have to turn to other technologies, whether it be fixed wireless, whether it be wireless mobility, or whether it be satellite services. We have to figure out how best to take advantage of all technologies. I'm committed to technology neutrality, even if I dislike net neutrality.
Well, you said that phrase, so I have to ask. There's a big comment period, restoring internet freedom. Can you talk a little bit about what the FCC is doing there and how this will affect the future?
Sure. So our item is currently accepting comments and will for most of the summer. Where I left my office, I was getting 1,000 emails an hour. So people are very actively sending them to me and to the commission. We're over, last I checked, over 5 million comments from citizens on both sides, or all different sides, depending on their comments. Some of them are extremely colorful. Some of them are not very polite and things you can't share in public. Others are helpful and substantive, and we'll try and digest all of them as part of our item and get to a decision later this year. I think the chairman framed a very thoughtful approach. He asked just about every question imaginable. If you're looking at this policy, there are steps that the previous commission did not do. They skipped certain things. I think the chairman tried to cover the waterfront and examine every aspect of the policy that was already in place by the last commission and how we should change that, what's the best going forward. So we're taking those comments on, and we're going to see where it goes. I've said to people, and I'm committed to this, that I'm driven by two things. I'm driven, as a fiscal conservative, I'm driven by a couple of things, and as someone who spends time in government, I'm driven by a couple other things. And that part is I'm driven by the law, and I'm driven by the record. And those are my obligations. I obviously come to this discussion on net neutrality with a pretty wide stated comments on a number of different components to our rules. But I also come at it with the idea that I'm willing to be convinced otherwise. And so if someone can make a compelling argument in the record, I will look at it and see if it changes my mind. So I have that obligation, I think, as someone who approaches this job, and I think that's what you expect out of regulatory body, and that's how we're going to proceed. So hopefully later this summer we'll make, the fall time frame, we'll make a decision, and we'll just see where it goes.
Yeah, refreshing. Before we go to questions from the audience, is there something that you want to touch on that I have not asked, or something that you're just...
Well, I think hopefully I highlighted it in the beginning, but I want to thank you for all that you do in terms of bringing, the important things to our economy. It's jobs. It's a recognition of what that brings to individuals, whether it just not only be, providing some subsistence to their families, but also some purpose to their lives. Thank you for being willing to do so. The small businesses are to take an idea from wherever the case may be and try and figure out and persevere to try and make that happen, expand your businesses as possible, or those that you work with. I spent, to the previous panel, I spent a ton of time with SCORE and Women Business Centers and a number of the SBA programs, and they do wonderful work in some settings. Other times they may not work. It depends on the circumstances. So to do that and put capital at risk, I just want to applaud you and all that you do, whether you actually have a business yourself or you advise businesses or are in the sphere itself. So I can't thank you enough for what you do.
Well, thank you, and thank you from all the entrepreneurs in the audience. And why don't we open it up to questions? We have one over there.
Hi, Commissioner. Katie McAuliffe, Americans for Tax Reform and Digital Liberty. I was wondering, talking about rural issues and getting broadband out to those areas, I've been hearing a little bit about newer technologies like satellite constellations for Wi-Fi or the use of TV Y spaces for providing Wi-Fi. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about both of those and the viability of that.
Sure. So I'll start with the first, and that's the satellite constellations. We have a number of applications before the commission to provide new constellations to bring internet services to Americans. A number of existing satellite systems are doing that, increasing their speeds. In the past, there have been satellite services that people have criticized for lack of speed, lack of reliability, and problem in terms of customer service. I think the new opportunity is to rebuild and rebrand those satellite offerings to consumers, and the speeds that they have presented to the commission in terms of where they think they can go are quite attractive, certainly for those areas that are dealing with no service or troubling service. So I'm hopeful that 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, we have a dozen or so applications, depending on the technology, overlapping, of course. We're talking, hundreds to thousands of satellites. So you've got some challenges to get all those satellites up. I was just in Florida at Cape Canaveral looking at some of the facilities in terms of launch capabilities and the number of satellites that have to get up to make this work, depending on the constellation. So it is a real possibility that in the not too distant future we could see some really exciting and productive satellite offerings that better than we have today as new satellites are deployed. So that's exciting for what it can mean to certainly rural America. The second part, in terms of Wi-Fi and what it can do, I'm a huge defender and supporter of Wi-Fi and unlicensed spectrum. You mentioned TV white spaces as one of the options. We're obviously in the middle of concluding a particular issue and broadcast incentive auction. Most of you hopefully don't have to deal with that capacity, but we're working through those issues, and there'll be fewer television broadcasters and therefore reducing the amount of spectrum for television broadcasting. So there'll be fewer white spaces throughout, but there'll still be white spaces, and hopefully that technology, it's been a tortured process, but hopefully that technology has matured to a point that it will be available for broadband services in the not too distant future. A number of technology companies have re-engaged on the topic, and so I think that's something that is really exciting given what the location, the spectrum band, and also the low cost. And I look at the broader question of Wi-Fi and unlicensed services as a great opportunity. It may be expanding existing networks for low cost. It may be in rural America, or it may be densification within urban cities. But Wi-Fi has been a tremendous success story, and it becomes a challenge for the commission in terms of making spectrum available for both licensed and unlicensed. And the unlicensed community has done wonders with the bands that they have. They're congested today, and we're trying to figure out if we can give them additional spectrum for this purpose, so they can continue to innovate and bring services in amazing speeds. I mean, you think about the original Wi-Fi, unlicensed Wi-Fi standard delivered 1 to 2 megabits per second. The ones that are operational today, the current standards, are in the 8 gigabits. And we're talking about the 802.11ay standard generating somewhere around 250 gigabits a second. Think about how fast and how that is compared to the time frame for how long it took to get to that point. So it's amazing what may be available. We can't hold out hope that things always are going to promise, but we certainly see them on the horizon.
Other questions? I'm going to throw one out real quick. How can small businesses and entrepreneurs help you in terms of what you're doing at the FCC?
That's a great question. And my answer to you is, please take advantage of our record. We are obligated to respond to any comments in the record that are unique. We often have net neutrality is a little aberration. It's going to get plus more than 5 million, obviously, comments. But there are many of our proceedings that have an impact on small businesses that get very few comments, dozen couple dozen comments at most, many of the big players. We often lack having a small business perspective in terms of the cost of things. What does it mean for businesses in terms of compliance? What does it mean? How does it change your behavior? That would be so beneficial. And I realize that's not your first priority, right? To be sitting there reading the Federal Register on items that you want to respond to. That's why you have great organizations like this to try and figure out how best and when to respond. But I take advantage of the opportunity. And the second is, and I'm not advocating any policy here, I'm just saying be engaged in your elective representatives' lives. They are very interested in what's happening in their communities. I happen to have spent my background, has spent a great deal of time working for members of Congress on both the House and Senate, and they are very interested in small business. It was extreme priority for almost everyone that I've ever spent any time with on Capitol Hill. So be engaged. It's very important. So those are my two messages.
A question over here.
So following up on your question, as a already existing small business owner, but looking to get back into telecom, I worked in telecom in the private sector, looking for opportunities. How does one, from your perspective, best take advantage of the record, or would you recommend from the other side, from organizations that are sort of focused or have focuses on that, so that I can discover some opportunities?
So we've had some critiques of our filing system recently, giving all the comments that have been filed, but generally our structure is pretty sound, and we make the information available. We could certainly have a much smoother website for people to be able to. It's difficult for myself. It's difficult for many people to use, so it's not as intuitive as it should be. We're trying to improve that process. It's gone through many rounds, but to your larger point, it is, again, yours have so many challenges before you, and so filing in our record is probably not the highest priority, and never maybe will be. But that's why you have great organizations. So, but we take time and digest all of the comments that are filed from whoever files them. So from the informal emails we will take to the official comments, and try and to digest what substantive points that are made and see if they change the direction of our items. So we really do try to put as much weight as we possibly can. It's difficult when comments don't have any. There's no personal impact on the business, and it's just I've gotten 1,000 emails today. They're all identical, and they don't have any substantive weight to them. There's no commentary there. So if you can add that to your submissions, it's so much more helpful.
Commissioner, thank you for all you're doing, and also just from a lot of the reforms at the commission in terms of just listening to small business. I mean, I think one of the first orders focused on small business, and be more transparent about the process, I think, is really critical. And I think once small businesses, and not only at the FCC, but federal departments and agencies throughout the federal government, see that they are being listened to, and that their voice matters, and that will definitely get their engagement, because many times they do think that their voice is being ignored. So I really don't have a question, only just to thank you, and just to continue to do what you're doing, and reach out to SBE Council or any of the small businesses here today to sort of provide you with that feedback and sort of on the ground impact of regs and rules that you're looking at.
I can't thank you enough. That's wonderful.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Commissioner O'Reilly, for coming. We really appreciate you being here today. Can we have a round of applause for him?
Yeah, absolutely.
And Karen, I'll turn it back over to you or Susan.
Oh, okay. We're going to be moving on. Are we ready to go?
I'm ready.
Thank you again, Commissioner. And okay. Just give us 1 second. We're going to find our next speaker. Hold on 1 second.
I'd be happy to sing and dance for you all, but I'd clear the room in a heartbeat. So are any of you in the room other than Sabrina, entrepreneurs? Raise your hands if you're an entrepreneur. Oh, great. You're in your own practice? Very good for you. There is a good book. You were talking about equity crowdfunding, written by Cliff Inico. Just came out. It's all about the new rules and regs and stuff. I'm sure you know it all, but you might want to refer it to some of your associates. So, what's your favorite takeaway from today? Anybody? Boy, you're a quiet bunch. I mean, really, to be such passionate entrepreneurs, come on.
You got to listen sometimes, right, Susan?
That's
and
right.
absorb it and take
Yes.
it in. So I think we have a little bit of just a little break. And,
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
We'll just alert everyone when the FTC.
All right, we will be back
Chair gets
shortly
here,
then,
yeah.
as they say. Okay, all right, all right, all right.
I looked it up because, you're like, what is my statute? Although my predecessor did chairwoman,
Okay, so look at it now. Okay, all right, okay, all right. Okay, all right, you're on. All right, everybody, we are ready to go.
Yeah, we're going to get some folks back in the room here.
Oh, I'm fine, thank you. I just had some.
So our next panel is called A License for Opportunity. And we're so pleased that Acting Chairman of the Federal Trade Commission, Maureen Olhausen, has joined us. And our own Susan Solovic will be moderating this discussion. So take it away, Susan.
Thanks, Karen. Your ears might have been burning a little bit earlier because this has all been a hot topic.
Okay,
So,
great.
we actually, I think a lot of small business owners, when they think about the FTC, they don't really think about it in terms of what it means to our businesses. And we're going to really drill down on licensing reform a little bit later on. But
great.
just so we're educated, can you give us an idea of what the FTC does to help small businesses?
Absolutely, I'm delighted to. And you know, the FTC is a small agency with a big mission, and I think small business understands that, right? You face that every day too. You have a small dedicated team, but a lot to accomplish. And what our mission is to do is to protect consumers and to promote competition, and to do that in a way that burdens legitimate business as little as possible. So there's a whole bunch of different ways that we can do this, and we try to do this for small business. And it's been a big issue for me. So one of the first things that I did as the acting chairman of the FTC is to create a part of our website that is just for small business, really pitched to small business, that gives you some of the business education materials in plain language. How do you comply with things like advertising requirements? What should you look out for data security, for privacy? You don't need to have a big legal team and a general counsel and all that kind of stuff. This is kind of plain language kinds of things that you can use to guide and understand sort of where the guidelines are, what the rules of the road are as you operate. The other thing is small business can also be the victim of some of these kinds of scams and frauds and things like that. So we have tips too for how to avoid being the victim of ransomware, what you should do, things like that. And so we're trying to help small business stay on within the right lane on the road, and also to protect themselves from bad actors.
You know, that's very helpful because I know a lot of times we were just talking, sometimes small businesses just don't know, and they fall victim or they make a mistake, and it's costly either way.
Absolutely.
Obviously too, regulatory reform is a huge issue for small businesses, and the president signed an executive order, and the agencies are looking at that in terms of, can they streamline it? Can they get rid of it? Is it outdated? Whatever. But you also have your own initiative at the FTC. Can you share some examples of specific rules you're looking at and the direction you're going?
Sure, I'm happy to. And I fully support, even though we're an independent agency, I fully support President Trump's executive order on regulation. I think taxpayers should really expect that their government be streamlined and be efficient. I know business is under that kind of pressure every day, so why shouldn't we in government also think hard about those kinds of things? So I've directed the FTC staff to we're mainly a law enforcement agency, and we do, as I said, business and consumer education, but we do have some regulations. And I've asked staff to look at them, to do a review and see, are there ones we can streamline or the ones we can get rid of? And this is an ongoing project. This isn't just a one-shot thing. So let me highlight two of the recent things that we've done. Some of our rules go back quite a ways, and technology has moved on, and it doesn't necessarily make sense to do things the way that we used to do them. So one of them is the picture tube rule. So believe it or not, we have a rule about marketers having to advertise their screen sizes based on a horizontal measurement of the screen. And so that doesn't really make sense today. In the our big, looking around here at the big flat screen TVs, it's not the same technology that we were looking at in the past. So we've put it out for public comment to whether consumers what they understand and whether they expect about measuring a TV screen. And once we get comment on that, then we'll figure out, do we change that rule because technology has moved ahead. It was enacted in 1966, actually. So if you can imagine, TV technology has really changed
I
a
bet
lot.
there are people who don't even know what a picture tube is
I
anymore.
know, isn't that funny? Even you're probably saying, what's a typewriter? What's a picture tube? Then we have some other things involving textile rules. And they had some requirements about including a certain the manufacturer, like a house mark kind of thing for the manufacturer. And we used to have to collect that kind of thing, and we don't. This was back in 1959 when it was enacted. But again, technology has changed and made this kind of obsolete. All this information is available on the Patent Office's website. So it's obsolete, and it's just causing businesses to take an extra step that isn't serving anybody's needs. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. We're not stopping there, but those were two, I would say, kind of easy targets to start with because, again, the technology had far outstripped what our rules had required.
That's great. Well, we've been also talking here today about how regulatory reform and that it is really challenging for small businesses. But that's not just to give the federal government a bad rap. I mean, it's at the state, the local levels too. And I hear the SBE's council, we're really excited about your economic liberty task and its focus on reforming excessive licensing. Can you talk about this project and why did you decide to focus on that issue?
I'm very excited about this project. This was actually the first thing I announced when I became the acting chair of the commission, and it really builds on a long-standing interest of mine, which is concerns about putting barriers in place for businesses to get started, for entrepreneurs to kind of take that first step up on the economic ladder. And I've focused on it, very much throughout my entire career, both through enforcement and advocacy. I'm concerned often about what I call the brother may I problem, which is where you need your competitors' permission to enter the marketplace. So you're going to come in, you're going to disrupt the market, you're going to compete with the incumbents, and you need their permission to do it. I mean, the world being what it is, they may not want to give you that permission, right? And so I've tried to focus on that. But we're in an agency where we care. I mentioned our mission is both competition and consumer protection. So often these restrictions and rules are put in place with the idea that it's necessary to protect the public. It's a health and safety kind of thing. And there are, legitimate justifications for having some rules and some regulations in place to protect the public. But I find it very hard to believe that that is necessary for things like doing hair braiding, right? Or interior decorating, or florist arranging, flower arranging, being a florist, and things like that. So we've tried to shine a spotlight on these kinds of issues. And to say, is this really protecting the public or is it hurting competition? But because we're a consumer protection agency, I think we can speak with some authority on these kinds of things too. We're not insensitive to the needs to protect the public, but is this really the right way to do it? And so one of the things that I've tried to do through this task force is to really shine a spotlight on this issue, to draw attention to it, because it's grown exponentially. So there's research that suggests that back in the 1950s, only 5% of jobs did you need a permission slip from the government to perform. Now it's between 25 and 30%. So there's been exponential growth in this area, and I think it's hurting job mobility. I think it's hurting entrepreneurialism, and I think that's the kind of thing that I'm trying to get attention on and kind of create a what I call a coalition of the willing, of people to come to talk about this, focus on it. We have part of our website on this, and we're having a workshop on some of these issues at the FTC on July 27th. It's open to the public. And I've also done some work with folks in state government. So I did an op-ed with Governor Walker. I've done something with Governor Ricketts. We talked to the state AGs because I think there's a lot of interest in making progress in this kind of area.
What are you finding is, by the way, when I read your material, my parents owned a funeral home when I was growing up, and when the florists would get really busy, I'd run over and help do funeral sprays. Little did we know I wasn't supposed to be doing it without a license.
Yes, right. Well, it's only one state, and that's another thing about this. So there's about 1,100 jobs that are licensed in at least one state, and floral arrangement is only in one state. But there's only about 100 that are licensed in every state. So you say, well, if it's okay in all those other states, why does it need a license?
So what's the biggest resistance that you find to the reforming the process, and is there a way to accelerate it with the states and local levels?
I think the biggest challenge here is that the state legislators and regulators are only hearing one side of the story, right? They're only hearing from the people who want to keep the competitors out. And so their interests are concentrated. They have a reason to be organized and to go to legislators and say, we really need this restriction. And they're not hearing from the consumers or the businesses that haven't been formed yet. Because the consumers don't yet know they're going to, have their choices restricted or prices raised, and the other businesses haven't really gotten off the ground or been formed yet. So I think there's that imbalance, right? So you're only hearing one side of the story, and that's another thing that this task force is trying to do, is making sure that as people are considering whether these rules should be put in place, they hear the other side of the story. They hear the competitive, the entrepreneurial side of the story and the consumer interest side of the story.
So have you seen any progress yet, and maybe can you share a couple of good examples?
I have seen some progress. So some of you may have seen it. It's kind of a basic thing, but I think it just hits home so well for people on the hair braiding issue, right? So states are starting to say, does this make sense? We have people, particularly African American women who want to be entrepreneurial in this space, and they have all these restrictions that are like, you need thousands of hours of cosmetology training and all these licenses and pay all this money to do, just a very simple thing that, is very, in demand and it doesn't raise health and safety concerns. So I think that has really caught on. We've seen it in some other areas as well. Where these questions are definitely being raised, but I think there was one other one that got a lot of attention. There was a red light camera. I think it was in the state of Oregon, or maybe it was Washington. It was Oregon. All right, I was right on my first. I should have gone with the first one, Oregon. And a gentleman had timed the yellow light and said it had been shortened so that the municipality could get more money, right? Because more people are going to run the red light. And he brought this to the attention of the public through a public meeting, and he got charged with the unauthorized practice of engineering by the state engineering board for doing math, for timing a light and saying, and so that got a lot of attention. I think maybe Wall Street Journal wrote about it, or some newspaper wrote about it. I tweeted about it. And then they finally rescinded the fine. But I mean, if you can imagine the kind of abuses that can take place. So that's not a small business issue, but you can imagine similar things being replicated for small businesses across the country.
It was just like we were talking about earlier with regulations. It's the unintended consequences, and sometimes you just want to say, "Did you use some common sense here?" But anyway, so how can all of us in this room? I've got a lot of doers, a lot of people passionate about small business. How can we help you?
Well, I think there's really a lot that people can do. As I said, again, a lot of this is really about informing state and municipal and city officials about the other side of the story in occupational licensing. You can look at our website, ftc.gov/econliberty for helpful resources in this. And I think just kind of raising the profile on these kinds of issues. You can bring your stories to the FTC too. We do file advocacy comments with state and local officials to challenge some of these regulations. I used to run that part of the FTC when I used to head the Office of Policy at the FTC, and I ran the advocacy program. And we had about a 50% success rate with these things, which I thought was really kind of just about the right percentage, because you don't want to, there's always this challenge, like, you can jump in front of the parade, the thing's going to happen anyway, and you file your letter and feel good, like, oh, we got success, but what we really want to do is get in there at the margins and where it really will make a difference, where we weigh in. So those kinds of things, and just bring your ideas to us. And our roundtable's on July 27th. It's going to be streamed live online. And so we invite, as I said, it's a coalition of the willing. So we invite everybody to kind of join in.
That's great. Well, I have one more question for you, and then we're going to take a few questions from the audience. With some of the agencies, there's often a lot of overlap, duplications, and that's confusing for a small business. They don't know which end is up, so to speak. What is the FTC doing to help reduce that kind of confusion and complexity?
That's a really good point. The FTC is a very broad jurisdiction, and we cover almost the entire marketplace, but there are a few carve-outs. So it's really inevitable that we're going to have some overlapping jurisdiction with other government agencies. So we've the FDA, the CFPB, Department of Justice, NHTSA. We just did a connected car workshop with NHTSA this morning. But one of the things we try to do is to handle these kinds of overlaps through agreements between the agencies. So we have memoranda of understanding where we say, well, you handle this and we'll handle that. Because really nobody wins if we have these duplicative or conflicting government rules. And it can hurt businesses, it can cause unlevel playing fields, it's problematic. And it doesn't really benefit consumers either. So we are trying to work to coordinate. I have a lot of discussions. I think you just heard from Mike O'Reilly from the FCC. I do quite a lot with my fellow commissioners at the Federal Communications Commission. There are attempts to kind of reel back in their privacy rule, which conflicted with the kind of the FTC's approach and pushed us out. I think is a good example of how I'm working with them, and we're trying to come up with a consistent approach that doesn't cause an unlevel playing field and has kind of a one-stop shop for businesses.
I sure commend you for that. It's sort of like, you go to one doctor and he's a specialist in this, and then she's a specialist in something else, and they never talk to each other.
Right.
So that's wonderful. We appreciate your communication there. Let's take some questions from the audience. Yes. There you go. Why not?
Hey, thank you. My name is Darren Ayudo. I'm an IP attorney, and I saw that you guys had, or your department had, a IoT home security challenge this year.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not concluded yet, but I was curious about the participation levels and how that went.
So I don't think it's concluded yet, but we've done these kind of challenges before, which is kind of harness the creativity that's out in the marketplace to say, can you solve this problem for consumers? And we'll pick a winner and we'll give them a prize. And so we've done it for robocalls a couple times. And so now we did it for Internet of Things devices, connected devices. So I can follow up to see what our participation rate is, but I know in the past we've had really good success with these kinds of challenges.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And my apologies for everybody who's heard this. But I wanted to see if, when you're working with the state and local governments, if you're working on process for licensing too, because a lot of the issues that I've been seeing, and it's with different entities, is that the process is you send in your application, they look at it, they as soon as they see a problem on page 1, they send it back. You fix page 1 and send it in, it goes to the end of the stack. Then by the time they get to it again, they find something on page 2. They send it back. So it can take a ridiculous amount of time. So the process of licensing is just kind of evading common sense.
I think that's a really good point, and that's something we could bring up as we discuss in our license, our work on occupational licensing. That it's not just the requirements you need to meet, but how long it even takes to get this license. One of the groups we've been working with quite closely on this is the Department of Defense, because this is a particular issue for trailing military spouses. So they move a lot, and if they need, the spouse needs to get a license renewal in every place that they go to, it is really burdensome, and and just the process, as you point out, they may be on somewhere, deployment somewhere in the U.S. for 2 years. And if it takes a year to get that license, it's led to a very high over 20% unemployment rate in that population. So we're talking about having interstate compacts and reciprocity on some of these kinds of licensing, so that it's not that you're caught in this endless, application process.
For that, I'm actually a lawyer and with somebody who's active duty Army, and one of the problems is that it's only effective for when you're when they're active duty. So if we retire in a place where I'm not licensed and I'm getting special treatment because he's active duty, then after 5 years I have to undergo the entire licensing process. So that's also an issue with military spouses.
Well, thank you for pointing that out. I think that may be something they need to look at, and we're happy to hear more about how these programs can be improved.
I have a question back here. So I'm a small business owner, and we're a retail business, a gourmet popcorn shop. And I recently learned about a new website you launched for small businesses impacting those who are affected by scams or cyber issues. I was wondering if you could share more about that. We've recently had an experience like that, and I didn't know that there was help out there or a place we can go to get some information or guidance on how to protect your small business. Can you share more about that website?
Sure. So that website really is the idea of making this information available to small business. So we worked with the Small Business Administration. Linda McMahon and I did an op-ed together on this, drawing attention to it, because we want those materials to be accessible. We want people to know about it. So we have tips on it for like ransomware, how not to take steps to not get caught up in ransomware. Things like it goes way back to like the office supply scams, right? Where a company calls up and says, oh, somebody here ordered these, light bulbs, and, we're going to ship them, and you end up getting this big bill. You never ordered the light bulbs. They're most expensive light bulbs you ever heard of in your life, and this is like been going on for years. And so we want to give companies tips, small business tips about how to avoid these things. So if you have any ideas of how we can get that before that website information to small business, we're happy to do it. We've got Twitter, we do Twitter chats. We have any ideas we're happy to pursue to get this information into the hands of the people who really need it.
Thank you for coming, Acting Chairman. We really appreciate it. In your work on the occupation licensing reform, and I know you've been working and with the Economic Liberty Task Force, probably different constituents. Is there any constituency that, as a small business group or the small business owners in this room, that we can reach out to that we might not think as sort of one of our typical type of allies in terms of making changes at the state and local level?
Sure. Well, so I mentioned the Department of Defense, right? So they've been an important ally for us in this. But there's also an organization called the Institute for Justice. I don't know if you're familiar with them, and they have been challenging occupational licensing restrictions for quite a while, and they're just wonderful resource, and they've brought a lot of challenges for entities like food trucks or hair braiding was one of their cases, and they actually litigate them based on a constitutional challenge. We can bring it based on antitrust or just user advocacy, but they actually have done it on a constitutional basis and have had quite a lot of success. And they've done a fantastic job of outreach too, to kind of explain to people why this is really an important issue for job mobility, for people, kind of moving up the economic ladder.
Do we have any more questions? Well, thank you again so much. Great information.
My pleasure. Really happy to be here.
And we'll be out there trying to help you do your work. So,
excellent. I look forward
appreciate
to
it.
Thank you.
Karen, I'll throw it back to you.
We're going to get set up for the next panel, just 1 minute, and we'll get going. So thank you again, Acting Chairman Olhausen.
Thanks so much. It's really a lot of fun.
Be careful. You're killing me though.
one more. Go. All right. Yep. That's great. Oh, I thought I was just going to say Oh, you are. So excited to see that now.
I'm proud of where I'm from. It taught me, everything. Taught me how to love. It taught me to be the man that I am today. Taught me to appreciate what you work for, to work hard, and to always make the next day better than the day before. There are so many lessons that we're on this earth to learn, I feel like, in daily interactions, daily experiences. Sometimes things that you don't understand till way later, that come with wisdom, age, experience. And it's I'm proud of where I'm from. It taught me, everything. Taught me how to love. It taught me to be the man that I am today. Taught me to appreciate what you work for, to work hard, and to always make the next day better than the day before. There are so many lessons that we're on this earth to learn, I feel like, in daily interactions, daily experiences. Sometimes things that you don't understand till way later, that come with wisdom, age, experience. And it's inspiring. It's inspiring to work for something that you believe in, where you can feel the quality of everything that we do, the authenticity, the hunger. It truly comes from the soul. I've never feared not living the life I dreamed of. I know what I want. I'm gonna go after it. I'm gonna give it everything I got and do what it takes. To see your dreams manifest, to see something you wanted to start, plan it out, make it happen, it's an amazing feeling. It's the pursuit of happiness. It's just the right energy. That energy that you got coming up, that energy that reminds you, re-energizes you, and gives you faith in whatever you're doing. Those moments, those emotions, those feelings, you know, it feels right. That's how you know you've made it home. I love you, Detroit. I love you for real.
Michigan, Michigan State, Wayne State, the local universities, which were really positive and really good and really impactful. And I remember all of a sudden we started losing kids. Now I'm going to Chicago, I'm going to New York, I'm going here. We started really getting concerned that, so we called kids in, started interviewing them. There was a day I interviewed this young graduate, 22, from University of Michigan, and I was told by my people and associates that he has chosen to go to Chicago versus Detroit. And I go, we couldn't believe it. We all of a sudden started losing these great talented people. I said, how come you're leaving? I think his name was, everybody that age is named either like Matt or Josh, so we'll use like Josh. So I go, hey, Josh, why are you? I love your company. It's great and all that, but he goes, stand up with me. And we're out in a suburb. It's a long story, but we're in a suburb and on the fourth or fifth story, looking over like 800 asphalt cars, 800 cars on asphalt, right? One big parking lot. He goes, see this parking lot? I go, yeah. He goes, and he goes, where's the closest place to eat? And I point 2 miles, there's Max and Irma's. He goes, there's a freeway across the streets, Costco. He goes, nothing personal, Mr. Gilbert. Call me Mr. Gilbert. He said, nothing personal, but I don't want to drive my car on asphalt, park 300 yards away, walk in the morning, and then by the time I walk out, it's night, and I don't want to eat at Max and Irma's every day for lunch. And it sort of hit, that really hit me. I mean, that wasn't the only reason, of course, but it really was very, again, symbolic of what was going on. And so, we felt we had to get to an urban core to compete for talent. Now, Detroit wasn't the bastion in the world at that point, but when you combine that with, how we felt about being able to help the city, we just decided to go for it. And I'm going to cut the story short because at that time we moved 1,500 people. Now we're 17,000 downtown, and there's more than us there, that's for sure, and it's an exciting place to be.
That's fantastic. And it must be, so there must be entrepreneurs. Obviously, there's new business creation. I've read a lot of individual stories about great success there. I mean, this whole forum we're having today is how to sort of reboot entrepreneurship. We're still in a lull. There's a dearth in entrepreneurship. We're talking about policies, access to broadband, education, all that. What do you think are the key issues to really get entrepreneurship, get it back again?
I went to Michigan State. Dearth is a gap. Gap? Okay, let me make sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
My chief economist taught me that one. So
I got
thanks,
you.
Ray.
Make sure. So, a couple of my associates here from U of M, University of Michigan, they know those words. So it's interesting because in one sense, when you look at the tech sector, right, in Silicon Valley, and those are like these high-profile, fast-running startup businesses, and if you looked at that, you think the world is booming in entrepreneurship. It's not the numbers. I read that also recently, right? It's the numbers don't show.
3.4 million missing businesses.
So what does that mean exactly? There's 3.4 million. There were more at one point or per year that started. I mean, how many less per year are starting than before?
A couple 100,000. So when you look at sort of year over year, right?
Yep. So there's a lot. So, well, I think that the environment for sure, post financial crash, I guess, or post crash, was probably one of people not having the most positive outlook. I think optimism. You have to be sort of optimistic to start a business. Period. Right? You just have to be optimistic and believe. And overall, the less you're going to believe in the whole story of the country, it's an overhang. And I'm not sure. Nothing. I'm not. I try to, as you know, I try to. Well, I don't know if you know, but I try to be, support both sides of it because I have to and we have to, and it's the way it is in the world, and especially because we're regulated everywhere in 50 states and all that business. But I'm not sure the last decade or so was the overall message about business and starting business. I mean, business creates wealth and jobs. I'm not sure the average American knows that. I'm not sure people know that wealth is created. Like, I'm not sure that and that's crazy. But I'll just sort of ask people around the office, newer people, interns. We have 1,200 interns this summer from 205 colleges and universities in downtown Detroit. And you'll just ask them, how is money created? You just walk around, how is money created? Maybe about 1 out of 3 or 4 can really tell me it's just, wealth's created by people. I mean, people don't know that, and I think that really, when you think about entrepreneurship, that's what it's about. It's about, creating things, creating wealth, creating jobs. And I think that message, if we can get that message out more, I think that's going to encourage more people to take a look at what that is. It's not some greedy grab of cash, right? It's a wealth creating, job creating, good thing for the country and the world.
Yeah, and we think policy matters. I mean, you get the policy right, you get the economy moving a lot more quickly, So then it all works together and you get people feel more competent to take risk. I mean, certainly there is risk aversion, particularly around younger people.
Yeah, well, if they grew up in their first sort of memories as a teenager in their 20s, whenever it was 2007 and 8, 9, 10, that's probably just like some of us had grandparents or great-grandparents, from the Depression, they're telling you, they got a lot of money in the bank, some of them, they saved up and they still want you to go not waste a Q-tip or something. So,
right.
I
remember those stories, my grandma.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And it doesn't matter how much they saved after, how much they had, so I came from my grandfather, he was born in this country, but he had a car wash, and he was one of those guys, and my father was in the military and then had a bar in Detroit, and I think they were both sort of that way too, and to some degree, because they remember the Depression. So I think that we've got to erase people's memory, and I just think we have to celebrate, not just the tech sector. I mean, it's great to celebrate the tech sector too, but there's tons of, just every day you can hear of great, just neighborhood type of people who've taken a risk and a chance. Met a couple not too long ago that had quit their jobs at like 45 years old and opened this pizzeria in not a great area of Detroit, but they're killing it. I mean, there's all these stories that you just look, they're everywhere. I think we got to promote them more.
We do. And speaking of that, I mean, what you're doing in Detroit is amazing. And we have members who are successful entrepreneurs that have gone back to their hometowns, their main streets that have been shuttered, and are doing what you've done, but on a much smaller scale, although it matters, right, for rebuilding. And then, I know a lot of them are watching on live stream right now because they're working back home and working, they're entrepreneurs. What words of advice or wisdom that would you give them? I mean, they're running, you run up against resistance.
Yeah.
People, it's always been done that way. We can't do it, even though the whole town is falling down, right?
Yeah. Well, first of all, if you take a step back and say just the general economic rule of all time, the number one of all time, right, is buy low, sell high. Well, let's just start with that. So you're probably going to have a little bit better odds if you're going to get in something. So if it's a town that's down or a city that's down, and you have to make a commitment though. You can't just dip your toe in the water. But if you're going to make a commitment, and you're going to be able to get some space that's low expenses and all that business, just less of a risk, more of a chance of you being successful. Then let's just say, opening up in the middle of New York City or Chicago with the same idea, right? It's going to be more competition, way higher costs, all that other stuff. So in that sense, I think it's probably a positive for an entrepreneur. The other thing is, we've recently coined this new term. It's come out of what we've done in the last 7 years. And by the way, we just had our 32-year anniversary, believe it or not. It started like when we were 12 or something, but it wasn't quite that, but it was like 21 or something, right? I think it was 21 or 22, some of us. But here's the thing is, so there's for-profits and there's non-for-profits. And we like to now refer to us as a more than profit. And the reason for that is not because we don't make profits. In fact, we have, again, 17,000 people in downtown Detroit. I will tell you, and I cannot prove it on a spreadsheet, but I will tell you that we are way, way better, and I'll ask our CEO here in a second. We're more profitable and a better company in our day job, because we have this mission beyond just making profits. We're better, we're more profitable. I really believe that people morale is higher, people tie it together, they seem to care more. It just resonates with this millennial generation as well. And it's just an interesting phenomenon. And you don't have to be big, right? You don't have to be like a big company. I mean, like we started off with one person too. I mean, you're just going to make an impact just by any town you go to, and think of it in that way, and recruit people that feel and think that way. I think good things happen.
Great. Before, I want to get to a few questions from folks out here, if you don't mind, but we do have this ISM book, and your staff kindly sent this to me, so I was reading it into the wee hours of the morning. I love it.
And normally it's $19.99 plus shipping and handling. Did they give you? That's good.
And we have these for those of you joining us for the reception. So any favorite ISM that you have?
Yeah, I mean, just to explain quickly what it is, I mean, it's interesting because the first couple of pages, they're all the businesses that we're in. So we to this day, myself and Jay Farner here, and another gentleman, our vice chairman, Bill Emerson, we still sit with every new team member in every business, like for 8 hours, once every 6-7 weeks. We have, like 800,000 people at a time. And all we do is we don't talk about what we do for 8 or 9 hours. We talk about who we are. And really the isms, they're 19 sort of cutesy little things. But combined, they create our culture and they define who we are. And if you read through this, do we have books for everybody?
Yeah, we do. At the reception, we do. Yeah.
They bring their credit card, or it's free? We're giving it free. Okay.
We
we're
can
giving away-
arrange a
We're
credit
giving away
card.
free. I think we're giving away free. But when it's great bathroom reading, it really is. But if you look through this, you'll notice that well, the way we look at it, it's a compass for us. It serves as a way. If everybody knows our culture, it drives decision-making behavior actions and seeing the world through who we are, because every entrepreneur runs into something called time, 24 hours, right? So you can muscle out of business for a certain period of time. And then what happens when you have more stuff to do than time in the day? Well, if you don't have a culture, things can go very badly, and they probably will. And I also think that I've asked companies a lot of times, say, what's your culture like? What kind of culture? Say, well, we don't really have a culture. So by the laws of physics, that means it stinks. You do have a culture, and it's bad. It can't be like naturally, just coincidentally good because even companies that commit to it, right? I mean, the forces of what we call it horizontal gravity, right? You know what vertical gravity is, but horses trying to get things done when things are coming at you hard, and that's the way it is. They can destroy a company without culture, and then I could talk for hours on it, but I won't. But I think you enjoy the book. I think it's written in a way to enjoy it.
It's great. And we'd like to do some questions. I know, there we go.
Very interesting to hear about. As a college student, I spent 2 summers in Pontiac interning with General Motors. Again, this was late 80s, early 90s.
Way back before the turn of the century.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I revisited Detroit in the, let's say, mid 2005 or so. I swear I saw tumbleweeds going down that street that I used to work on in Pontiac. So my father worked the assembly line of General Motors, understanding that
In Detroit, is he from
not in
okay.
Detroit, in Kansas City, Missouri. Understanding how economy or business impacts community. I'd like to get your opinion about the Flint water crisis scenario from the perspective of corporate citizenship, and how I do believe that business is a privilege from some respects, and that there are some responsibilities in terms of supporting business to help keep the community. And then, whatever you may think about the Flint crisis, what positive roles or good corporate citizenship can help in rebuilding infrastructure, because from Detroit all the way to Pontiac, everything was built on the auto industry, and now the infrastructure or lack was an issue, and seeing it regenerate now over the the casinos and the other things. Do you have any thoughts or perspectives about how good corporate citizenship could help some of those infrastructure issues?
So first of all, just the Flint water crisis. So you're touching on bureaucracy, okay? That this whole book, our whole culture, our whole life, our whole everything almost is to me anti-bureaucracy. Like bureaucracy to me, I know people kid around, oh, it's so bureaucratic. I truly think bureaucracy is destroying like things in a lot of places, in government, in big businesses, even in foundations, in schools, in police departments, in military units. It's a poison. It's a poison, and I think in Flint, what happened from I don't know if it was exactly who was reporting to who, going all the way up to the governor, but I just think this culture of fear and people afraid to step up and make decisions and not caring about what is right, but caring about who said what versus what is right. Like one of our isms is, it's about what is right, not who is right, right? And to drive it through that kind of prism would prevent a lot of this stuff. People are afraid to make decisions and be wrong versus not making a decision. We don't make a decision, it could be way worse than wrong, and I think that's what happened in Flint.
If I'm allowed to say, one thing that just blew my mind was the fact that GM, the plant there, knew the water was bad, and they switched away from the water, but the city, whatever the case may be, so.
I don't know enough about that, or I haven't heard that specific thing about the detail of that, but you know, you guys all know probably about the FBI agent in Arizona who sent letters and noticed the guys who were taking flying lessons and had no interest in landing, but her letters weren't getting through, through the bureaucracy. Not that anybody was intentionally doing anything bad or wrong, but I really encourage every organization, big, small, government, private, profit, nonprofit, to really take a look, because when you go down the ground level and walk around and talk to people, you get the real story. You never get the story from the guys running the business. Usually they don't know what's going on. Usually they're a little bit clueless. And let me tell you something. I've had times, and Jay and myself, we talk about it. There's been times that even though we have this and all that we've been clueless. So it's easy to become clueless fast, and staying close. We call it in the bowels of the business. Very important.
Okay. Is there? Yep, right there.
Thanks. When you look at what's going on in Detroit now, particularly in terms of the sort of more recently emergent economic opportunities, do you see any particular industries or sectors that you think are going to play an important role over the next 5-10 years?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Detroit's going to be the center of the world the next 10 years. And I'm
Of course.
Well, let me tell you why. Okay. Besides this, we're trying to lead it in the fintech area, financial technology, and there's tons of startups going on there, and you almost every technology, like Microsoft moved downtown, Twitter moved downtown, name them, Snapchat just signed an office downtown. I mean, all the sort of big names that you've known in technology. There's a startup scene there that's really interesting, but cars are going through, as you know, this incredible transformation, the autonomous vehicle stuff, and yeah, there's stuff in Silicon Valley, but all those guys in Silicon Valley have big offices, and now we're opening up bigger ones in Detroit as well. They have to be close to the people that make the cars as well. And there's a race going on between, I asked Mary Barra the other day, I said, are you going to create a search engine? And she goes, what do you mean? I go, well, how about an iPhone? She goes, what do you mean? I go, well, those guys think they can make cars. How come you don't think you can make their stuff? But, my point is they're going to need each other. And so, if that's the big transformation in the economy, man, that's an opportunity for Detroit to step right back up, but in a sense of not just, we use this term also that we like to look at Detroit as the intersection of muscles and brains. So, moving things, assembling things, but now, moving the digital part, not only in the cars, but the startup scene as well. There's a lot of banking in Detroit. There's insurance. I mean, it's exciting because it's not just dependent on the manufacturing of cars anymore. And, but there's still a lot of people who, it's not the unemployment rate, it's that underemployment rate. Like there'll be about 4 or 5 billion of new construction in downtown Detroit with shovels in the ground starting in the next 6 to 12 months, right? They're already ready to go. And we're short. There's still people who are underemployed significantly. At the same time, we're short skilled labor. So if there's anything that I think infrastructure-wise the government can do, we talked a little bit about this at the White House today, again, it's got to be a great program. It's some way of this, switching the job training, getting people into the, people who are underemployed into the right skill level. I know that's nothing new. You guys hear this all the time, but I really think that's more and more of an issue as time goes on.
Yeah. Question? Yes, up here.
Am I the last guy on this today, or is this the last?
No. Kellyanne Conway will be here.
Oh, who's that? No, I'm just kidding. That's going to be way more exciting than me. Yeah.
So you guys have done tremendous work in Detroit, and I have a public benefit corporation, HealthFirst.com, and what we do is...
Is it Health First? I'm sorry.
Health First.
Oh, Health First.
And what we do is connect consumers with impact-driven businesses. And I was wondering, how do you all pick the causes that you go after? Because y'all aren't a benefit corporation, but you do tremendous work for the community. And
yeah, well, so I mean, you're hitting right on sort of that concept that more than profit. Like I think companies that stand up now with those big oversized fake checks and hand it out at the, I mean, I think they're not only selling themselves short, right? Because, they're trying to get some credit. It's just, and people sort of look at that now and whatever. And I think you got to engage the people who, it's not just money, right? It's engaging people who work there, the team members, and engaging them. And like we Jay, what is the volunteers? How many hours are you allowed to volunteer, and we'd still pay you per year? What is that?
We will pay. So you can volunteer as many hours as you want, and we will pay. We will also allow you to do something that you want that's not
There's a microphone.
Not on our list. Oh, thank you. That's not on our approved volunteer list. Up to 8 hours paid. That's
Yeah, we'll probably take it further, even at times. But so we'll pay whatever. a year, right? But things like that. So allowing people to do that. We have this tutor program. I'll give you an idea of something that we did recently. So Detroit Public Schools, a lot of people are working on the medium and long-term things. And we said, look, we have 17,000 people downtown Detroit. There's 40,000 people, or 20,000 rather, kids at, or is it 40? How many kids in Detroit Public Schools? Yeah. 40. There's 40. There's 80. There's 100. There's 40. Okay. The dream would be if we could get a one-on-one tutor with every single one of them, let's just say, is a dream. And be set with us in General Motors as well more. There's like, I don't know, 1 million people that work downtown or something like that, right? Maybe not that much, 500,000. So we started with a pilot of like 200 or 300 kids for 4 months. And we brought them in once or twice a week to their tutor assigned. And they get to, believe it or not, 35% of the kids in Detroit, and it blew me away. And I had people go check it out several times, but it's true, okay? Have never been downtown. Never, not even once. And so we get them downtown, we get them excited, we get them in these cool buildings. They go to a different building each time they come in for the tutor. They meet our volunteers, so they're doing it 3:30 to 5. We pay our people while they're doing it. And people go, how can you afford, those people that are sort of, how can you afford that? Those expensive. Well, the morale that you get for that and the people thinking they can make an impact and change, I'm telling you, it makes them better in their day jobs. And so I don't think it's necessarily just, we do give big financial support every year, but I think it's engaging your people to do things, and everybody wins. Everybody wins.
A question that we get from a lot of our members and what they're, when they are able to meet with successful entrepreneurs such as you, obviously excellence defines all your companies.
Well, most of them.
Okay, most of them.
You saw the Cavs lose to Golden State.
Yeah, okay. Well, I was going to go there, but
and again, that guy, he didn't. He left that team in free agency. That all-star Kevin, he's pretty good. So
yeah,
we'll have to figure out how to match it this summer.
But anyway, so you scaling the company, right, and taking it to the next level, and being able to maintain that excellence. I mean, it's very, very difficult for, small businesses that start one person, and then they really take it to the next level. I mean,
it's a great
what
question.
tips or advice?
I tell you what, I've studied this, so that this is really, so why do most entrepreneurs start a business, not most start, but the ones that do, they start off fast, or they may start off fast, but the ones that do, and then boom, ceiling. So this is just simplistic terms. It's the stuff that gets you from here to here, very, very different than the stuff that gets you from here to here. And people who, I wish I had 3 hands here because I can't talk and do it. But no, think about it. When you went from here to here, okay, it worked. It got you from here to whatever you were doing. Then all of a sudden, it stops working, and the person doesn't know what happened. I don't get it. Well, and I can give a lot of, when I'm time today, we can give thousands of examples, but it just doesn't work. You have to go over here now and do things very, very differently to grow on the next. And I think that I think it's probably changing as the word sort of gets out. People realize this, but they don't realize, they don't understand. They keep banging their head against the ceiling. And you just, and it's not an exact yellow line, right? Here to here, but at certain phases, there's just different ways you have to do things to continue to grow. So.
Is there anything, in terms of mistakes that you made early on that, you see maybe other startups or businesses making that you would do differently, or sort of the key mistakes people might make?
Well, I think, first of all, I probably made more mistakes in the last 2 years than the first 30. And I mean that. But the number one mistake I've made, and I'm really every year I try to learn, is not understanding the very thing I just said to you before, and hanging on to people for months or years, sometimes 5 or 10 years longer than they should have been. They could handle. It wasn't good for them, wasn't good for us. Dependency breeds resentment, right? Dependency breeds resentment, and if somebody's not bright or carrying their weight or whatever, ironically, they should be a little bit, you would think they're appreciative. They're resentful because they understand at some level they're not carrying it, and it's just a bad environment. So, last few years we've tried to move away from that, but that's been my mistake for years and years. The other mistake that I think I see people make, this concept of the spreadsheet, just because you can't measure something does not mean it's not valuable. Okay, in fact, I'll argue that the most valuable things in the world, and I'm not talking, again, I want to make it clear, I'm not talking about love and air and all those things people talk about, right? So I'm talking about the things in business that are most valuable are not measurable initially. So if you're going to run everything, what is the easiest thing in the world to measure? Expenses. So people, they sort of start doing, when things get a little tight, they do the opposite probably what they should do because it's measurable. Well, I can reduce my coffee, by X amount, and okay, well, you just spent all your time reducing coffee for the last 3 and you forgot about growing revenue and sales and innovation and all that other stuff. So, ideas can't be measured initially, and you have to have an environment that is, it's okay. It's okay to, to fail, to come up with ideas. Anybody should be able to come up with ideas at any time, and, Jake could probably talk more about this than me. You get to see so many of them, but those are probably the two biggest things that come to mind.
Well, I guess I'll get the last question in as well. When we look at surveys in our members of business optimism, it's really great. And they're feeling good about the future. While youth entrepreneurship has dropped off, new business creation, young people, you still have millennials and other Americans who want to start businesses. So, what is your feeling about the future, the next 5 to 10 years in terms of business creation and entrepreneurship? And
so it's kind of conflicted a little bit because you read and see more than ever, I think, right? And your associations and people talk about it, and because like I said earlier, the high profile, high tech guys, they're out there. You watch that show Silicon Valley, and you see whatever. And so it seems to be out there, but I think you're right. On the day-to-day sort of street to street, and I don't. You probably know more than me. Why is it exactly? Why is it not booming? Why is it not being created? Taxation. People talk about that. I don't think that. Look, you certainly need to have a healthy tax rate that can generate revenue, but also not be crazy where it's disincentive. But the worst part, the regulatory part, and the things that people have, even in Detroit today, and the mayor's done a great job, and he's just brought in a bunch of great people and all that, better than we've ever had before. But I talk to small business people, every week who say, I still had to wait at 27 different offices to get 27 different permits to whatever, put up my sign. One thing we learned, by the way, in Detroit, and probably in most cities, takes like a long time to get a sign on a building, right? Well, if the bureaucracy doesn't have it in their book, so we installed an entire fiber network in all of downtown Detroit in like 90 days because the guys looked it up at there's nothing that says we can't do it. Oh yeah, sure, go ahead. So we actually put the fiber network, dug trenches and the whole thing faster than we get a sign on a building.
And before someone found out, right?
Before they found,
you didn't. Yeah,
well,
there was no rule.
Yeah, they said we couldn't. So go ahead. They had because we put this light rail in down, and the trenches were built, and can we lay our fiber? Sure,
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just saying, that there's just so many barriers already, or so much difficulty, challenges already. It's hard enough, man, when you put in unnecessary silliness, by bureaucrats who like to do that kind of thing. And clown's a great word for it because it's just, I won't get into it here.
No, you're right. I mean, the rules and regs at the local level are particularly, where it hurts. I mean, we're really happy to see that there's pretty much a government-wide effort to sort of do a review, through executive order of all the rules and regulations, see what are outdated, unnecessary, what they need to streamline. But I think from a business perspective, there is optimism. But there does have to be sort of that growth and traction in the economy, that is sustainable growth, I think, that will get more entrepreneurship going. And then the policies actually implemented too.
Right.
What's been talked about, the big ones, tax, regulatory, healthcare reform, et cetera.
It's not, like you say, it's not just one thing, right? It's many things. And creating that environment that just people are I'm willing to take a chance, a risk, and if I fail, okay. People have to be okay with failure. That's the other thing, right? Today's world, and there's so much focus, and at least I notice this, my kids and my kids' friends, parents, and all this business with the, the scores and the grades and the this and the that. And let me tell you something, if you're a very smart kid, if you're smart, like you've been smart, 98% of them been smart, kindergarten smart, 6th grade smart, high school smart, college smart, good school, graduate, get in the real world, and they can't handle I don't care if you're Einstein, you're going to fail, and they fail, and then they never failed. And that's, again, it's not something you can measure, but that's a big issue. I think sometimes we see more success within our businesses from people who are BC students and A students, because the A students have never failed. BCs failed all the time, no big deal. Just,
That resilience,
So,
right?
right. You gotta learn how to fail. You gotta learn how to lose to learn how to win, I think.
Right. Well,
So-
what you've done in Detroit really has just been an inspiration for, I know, my members and for many people nationwide. And, what a great model to implement small scale in small towns, and but also in cities that need that type of work as well. And we really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule to be with us and share your isms book.
Thank you.
And all your wisdom.
And one last, just say one on the optimistic
You get the last
side.
word.
I talked to 3 guys from different countries who are starting businesses or involved in business in a big level in the country, not just Detroit, in the last 4 weeks. One from India. I'm trying to think where the other. No, 2 from India, and one was from one of the Eastern European. I know one of those countries. I don't know which one. Okay. And all 3, I asked them, so how is it in your? Oh, things are going pretty. How's it going in India? Pretty good. And I hear I've been there once a year or whatever. I go, what's it like to start a business there? And I swear to you, all 3 look at me and say, there's no place like this country. So we can't start. Forget that, man. It's not even. It's a disaster. You want to start a business, it's got to be and so that's the good news and the optimism. I still think we're way ahead when it comes to this concept, and we just kind of keep, fighting the forces that would not have that environment be as positive as it is or could be, because it's still a rare thing. It's still a rare thing, and you got to be appreciative of that.
Amen.
So
thank you so much,
Thank
Dan,
you.
for joining. Please join me in thanking
Sure, thank you.
Dan Gilbert. And we'll start our next program in about 5 minutes. Okay, it's running a little late, so. Excuse me, can everyone move in? We're going to be starting our next program right now. We have our next speaker, so everyone can sit down. That would be terrific.
Come on, everybody, please, let's get moving back in here. I know we're all entrepreneurs and we love to network, but there's a reception next, and I hope you all will be seated quickly. Our guest from the White House is here. There's nothing better than a room full of people who love small business. So until I knew that our last guest was going to be here today, and thank you very much for being here, I was actually going to end today's program by saying we saved the best to last. But I don't know. Some pretty big shoes to fill there. But we do have an outstanding guest. We're honored that she took time out of her schedule to be here. And of course, that is Kellyanne Conway, Special Counsel to President Donald Trump.
There we go. Let's see it. Maybe she's on, talking to the president or something.
The president probably called to tell us all hello, I'm sure. He wants us to take a selfie and send it to him.
Well, what'd you all think about
Okay.
Dan? Wasn't he fantastic?
You know, at the
if we had
first
more
pa-
Dans in the world, right? Could you imagine? Yeah.
Earlier this morning when I was talking about the crisis of disengagement in the workplace, I mean, those are the companies that are building great cultures and attracting the best and the brightest. I also liked what Dan said, because one of the theories that I always teach in my classes and have taught to MBA programs is you hire slowly and smart, but you fire fast. A warm seat in the body in a chair is not the answer to be building a great to be building a great company. You need the right people in the right seats, all rowing in the right direction in order to build the greatness of your business. And I'm sure Karen would agree with that too. So we're just going to wait a few more minutes, and then you're going to love this panel, or I shouldn't say this interview that Karen is going to do with Kellyanne. And then, of course, we have our reception. I hope everybody will be staying with us, and that you've had a great day today. Has it been amazing? Are you all fired up and ready to go out there to take on all the challenges to start getting small businesses growing again? Can I hear a hell yes? Oh, come on, louder than that. Come on. Hell yes.
One thing I did want to mention for those of us who are tuned in through the live stream and also those in the audience today is, we do have our weekly e-news, our Small Business Insider, and you can sign up on that at www.sbecouncil.org. We have great tips, information, educational content, everything we're working on here in the nation's capital and the states from a policy perspective. So, do check it out. So, looks like we're ready to go. Hey,
and I have to say, Kellyanne, I moved to Jupiter, Florida. I live in Jupiter Country Club, and every time you are on TV in the clubhouse, people go dead quiet. And when they heard I was going to be here with you, they said, "Please give her a big shout out from Jupiter Country Club." Thanks.
Kellyanne Conway. Everyone welcome Kellyanne, Counselor to the President. It's great to see you, Kellyanne. Been busy?
It's great. A little bit like everyone else here, I'm sure. And thank you to Jupiter. I was just in Miami last night, actually. Well, I appreciate that. And thanks for the 29 electoral votes, most of all. I'm from Florida. So, Karen, thank you very much for having me. I don't think anybody knows how long and how far we go back together. And I just think you've been an inspiration to legion of people who wonder if they should take the leap into entrepreneurship, and knowing that they have a network and a resource and a place that's going to give them credible information and ideas and support is really critical. I think when many people wonder, should I create that parallel universe and convert my skill set or my hobby into a full-blown entrepreneurial venture? So thank you to you.
Well, thank you, and congratulations on all your success. I mean, it's been amazing. I've known you for a while. Everything you've done has been successful. It's been terrific. First woman to successfully manage a presidential campaign. I think that deserves a round of applause and worth repeating.
We had a great team, fabulous candidates.
So Kelly, on entrepreneurs and small business, if I recall, when I was launching SBE Council, I think maybe 2 or 3 years into it, you were launching the polling company. So we were in close proximity. I think we were co-working before it was actually cool or a word. So, as a successful entrepreneur, and this question came in a lot from our membership. We said, if you talk to Kelly, and can you ask her this? Of all the attributes, that you have used to build a successful business, what has been the 1 or 2 at the White House, that has really come in handy, that you really leaned into in your new role?
Boy, that is a great question, because I think if you can bring private sector best practices into public service, it's very beneficial. And there are a number of people who work in this White House, in this West Wing, and indeed in this administration, Karen, who do have a small business background, or in some cases a big business background, larger employers, very successful businessmen and businesswomen in their own right in the private sector, bringing to bear those skill sets. Probably for me as a small business owner, I would say a few things. One is the plan, the organizational structure, the vision, all put together. Because I think that, and I did a tour of duty in Washington for 20 some years, and then I was in New York for 11 and back here. But I think one thing I learned about Washington earlier, I'm trying to apply now, is this, that you shouldn't overestimate how much you can get done by this Friday, but don't underestimate how much can get done in the next, say, 2 to 3 weeks or months. And so if you have that plan and that vision, then you're able to execute it. It's tangible. And I think that's first and foremost very important. The second one is to inspire other stakeholders, so colleagues who feel that they can be literally a small p partner in the effort, so that you realize someone worked on an initiative or a project like this in their previous business life at some level, or know someone who knows someone who knows someone who worked on this, and trying to draw them in. It's different from the word networking. It's actually, it's sharing of information in a way that people really enjoy being, I call it the connective tissue. So I almost automatically, immediately try to think, who do I know who's tackled this before in the private sector or indeed in the public sector? And is it someone who I don't know, but I know someone who can probably contact him or her? And I do that. The other thing, which I think is an incredibly important skill, is just to become impervious, polite but impervious to your naysayers and your critics. It's a great skill to have, because
Yes, a great one.
if you don't, it could just upend everything you're trying to do. And if you let other people define you, then you're really taking your eye off of that focus, the organization, the ability to build those relationships and share information to become that larger connective tissue. And there's this old story that, particularly for women, frankly, if a husband and the wife are sitting having dinner, and the man bought the meat, and the wife says, "Where did you get this meat?" Without looking up, he'll say, "Sam's butcher shop." Where the more likely scenario, the husband says to the wife, "Where did you get this meat?" And she'll say, "Why, what's wrong with it?" So I think to not always worry about something's wrong with it, and to just plod forward and not get diverted, whether it's just spending your life on social media or on emails or on text or on phone calls, but really giving yourself that time and that space to think. And then I would just say, and this is very important in the White House, and certainly was important as a small business owner, particularly when I was starting in the mid-90s, Karen, at a young age, which is that I've always been willing to accept the word no more often than I say it. And I think that's incredibly important to aspiring and active entrepreneurs, where you will be rejected. Someone will get the client you thought you deserved, or the promotion, or the funding, or the access to capital, access to colleagues. You will be disappointed. And that's okay. That's accepting rejection. It's accepting no, accepting failure and learning from it. But don't say the word no so freely. I'm not sure opportunity always knocks twice. So that idea that you're always there to volunteer, to listen, to help, to be part of a coalition or a group or a conference call, sometimes saying no has a tremendous downside. Even as I say, saying no is a gift a lot of people give to themselves so that you're not overstretched. But saying no in business when somebody's trying to count on you, be the person who raises his or her hand and is seen as reliable and accessible. And I think that's something that has really benefited me personally in the private and public sectors.
And if I can add too, I would say your resiliency and mental toughness, Kelly, and it is, well, you know, right, as in business, you know, it's tough out there and you got to wait, you get rejected, there's a lot of no's, there's, you know, a lot that happens. And the same thing, as you know, in the public sector as well. I mean, you just got to have that mental toughness, resiliency, and believe in yourself. So we've been talking all day about the state of entrepreneurship, the fact that you know, new business creation, you know, has, you know, we have a problem. According to our research done by Ray Keating, you know, there are 3.4 million missing businesses in this country. You know, the year-over-year lack of business creation. And so we're talking, I mean, we have hope, obviously, because, you know, we think the policy headwinds are moving, we're actually going with them as opposed to going against them. But I was wondering, in terms of this entrepreneurship, we know the president meets with business people, you know, and small business people. You know, obviously he's focused on business and jobs. But this whole issue of entrepreneurship and getting people to take that risk, is that something that he and, you know, your team and the White House thinks about as well?
Actively and daily. Whether it's with respect to healthcare reform, where if you look at the associated health plans, the whole point of AHPs is to get those people in the private market who obviously do not get employer-sponsored benefits the way most Americans do, roughly 175 million, or government-provided benefits like TRICARE or Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera. It's the people on the exchanges, and many of them, Karen, are plumbers or hairdressers or carpenters, people who can't afford to pay those types of premiums and get those types of plans in the co-ops or on the exchanges. And so if they can share the risk and share the costs, it's much more attractive to them. In terms of tax policy, you've heard the president and his economic advisors very forthrightly say that they're for a 15% tax bracket for small business owners. Now, I can tell you, as an S-Corp of many years, I've often thought what I would have done with a 15% tax bracket. I would have, most if not all years, reinvested it right back into the company. You can hire another person. You can expand, you can improve the office space or the infrastructure of what you're doing, or invest in, you know, tangibles or intangibles, frankly. But I'm fairly sure I would have put it back into the company and or provide better benefits for the employees, which is something that small businesses have always struggled with, right? You want to compete with the big guys for the talent, but you have to compete with them with respect to benefits, because we have found over the years more and more many employees will say, I stay at that job or I am seeking that particular position because of the benefits. I'm willing to give up 1,000 or 2 more, but the package is really great for me and my family. So just in terms of specific policies, also the president made clear as a candidate, as president-elect, and now as president, he has often said that for many Americans, particularly small business owners, it's the regulations that hurt them even more than the taxation. They would like both to be reformed, and both are being reformed and will be reformed dramatically. But the regulatory rollback is easier to do, easier and more quickly to do, because so much of it can be done through executive order and the like. And he's done that. He's chipped away at some of these late in the game regulations that were imposed by the previous administration. And we hear from small business owners and aspiring small business owners particularly. We also hear from taxpayers and property owners, for example, how much this helps them, whether it's through the EPA, workplace regulations that were just seen as really interfering in the private relationship between employer and employee. It's not like they were OSHA regulations. These were just not allowing flexibility. So So you see all of that. Also, he's talked about Dodd-Frank and Glass-Steagall. There are reforms that I know you've worked on for years and that are, really actively being discussed, if not worked on. The other thing is, I know President Trump to be as you do, a wildly successful billionaire businessman, but he's always thought as a small business entrepreneur. He really has. He's always thought as an entrepreneur. And I've seen that in execution over the years in business, but then particularly on the campaign and certainly now in the White House. I think that empathy with, and when he says forgotten men and forgotten women, he might as well have said forgotten businessman and small businessman and small businesswoman, because we hear from many, many people who say, I've just been so afraid to pursue my dreams and to start or to expand. And I've been afraid to do that because I'm willing to take the risk, but I can't risk the unknown. And the unknown are the greater, more regulations, more taxation. And that unknown has been very frightening to them. They see the federal government as invasive, intrusive, expensive, and expansive. So that is an active, I can't even say constituency, but a group of self-selected individuals who aspire and who achieve and who want to continue with their entrepreneurial interests that we talk about often, but then talk about in terms of policy even more often.
It was great to hear from, some of the other players at the agencies. For example, acting chairman, FTC chairman, Maureen Olhausen was here, talking about, and really, this is sort of a self-starting initiative that she had the FTC, her Economic Liberty Task Force, to really work on bringing down barriers at the local level on occupational licensing, which is a huge barrier to career opportunities and to entrepreneurship. And that, occupational is costly, it's expanding, it's pretty crazy. But just to see the FTC look at that from an anti-competitive perspective is just very exciting. And as you know, some of those regulations at the local level are the ones that really make the big difference in terms of whether you're actually going to go, you're going to launch.
Yes, and speaking of, Karen, I'm glad you raised that. One of the issues in my portfolio, and obviously anybody that's working on any one issue in the White House is working with a team. But as part of a team, one of the issues in my portfolio is military spouse employment. And one of the barriers we're finding to unemployment and underemployment for military spouses is this licensure fees, because the licenses, from state to state, 500 here, 800 there. And I noticed in one of the apprenticeship week meetings that we had, the president and his daughter and advisor Ivanka Trump and Gary Cohn and others, but there we were sitting with about 4 or 5 governors, bipartisan governors, and some of the cabinet members, and Governor Greitens, who's in his first couple months of his first term, new governor of Missouri, noted for us that in Missouri they either have or are working toward recognizing Air Force nurses as credentialed for the state of Missouri. So if you've been a nurse in the Air Force and you're credentialed and you're working and you have nothing, everything is fine. In other words, you have all these up-to-date credentials. Why wouldn't the state of Missouri accept that? And so that's a great example of it reduces the hassle, the paperwork, the time lag, and certainly the fees. So this is something we're looking at. I know there's legislation in the House, if not the Senate, to this regard. But for entrepreneurship, Linda McMahon, the small business administrator, who's really terrific and one of our most active cabinet members out around the country. And
she's everywhere.
She really is everywhere every day. I said, where's Linda? She's really terrific, and many of them are very active around the country. But she and I spoke recently in Military Spouse Employment Forum at the Chamber of Commerce, and she talked about entrepreneurship as an alternative for them. So to your point, we like to say entrepreneurship allows the, quote, workplace to be anyone and the workplace to be anywhere and the workforce to be anyone if you want. And entrepreneurship is really the key to that, because if you're going to be a home-based business or you're going to go rent an office somewhere, or you have been part of the traditional workforce or you left the traditional workforce a while ago to either raise children or care for an elderly relative or for whatever reason, this allows you an alternative to the traditional workforce. And so we like to say entrepreneurship allows the workforce to be everyone, the workplace to be anywhere. and we're quite serious about it. But these licenses and the fees and the hassle, something we really would like to look at. On trade, I should have mentioned trade. Thank you for mentioning trade. It has a huge impact on small businesses. I mean, look what's happening right this week when you've got, I think Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue will go to China on Friday, and obviously Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross has been so involved with this initiative, Jared Kushner and the Office of American Innovation. Basically, we're selling beef and dairy and poultry, we're selling beef to China for the first time in years and years and years. The president said he will renegotiate NAFTA. He's spoken to the leaders of Mexico and Canada directly about renegotiating it. He's taken us out of TPP, and he says, of course I'm for trade agreements, but they have to be truly bilateral. They have to start benefiting the United States of America. Same thing with withdrawing from the Paris Accord. And that, he looks at, sure, you can balance, and we must, economic growth and entrepreneurship with environmental stewardship. But we can't just pay $1 billion while India and China aren't going to pay until later. And so he just looks at this all as what's a good deal. And I think the main theme for President Trump, and certainly candidate Trump, but not President Trump, that really benefits small business owners as well is what I would call fairness. So he's always, what's fair? Is it fair that you work so hard and the government takes half of your money? Is it fair that a child can go to school only according to his or her zip code? Is it fair? For years people said, well, what's fair to the illegal immigrant? Now the question is, well, what's fair to the American worker or business owner who's competing with the illegal immigrant as well for that job? It's really this question of fairness. And when you look at everything through the prism of fairness, you're saying, how do we benefit? How do we break down those regulatory and tax barriers and other barriers to access and entry for our small business owners?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, so the tax code and regulation, those two things, right, that's why we need to reform, not only to modernize them, but definitely to make them more fair for entrepreneurs and small business. By the way, how optimistic are you, Kellyanne, and the president about getting a tax reform bill through?
Optimistic, and we're starting on, obviously, the tax principles, like Secretary Mnuchin, Secretary Ross, Mr. Cohn, and others. They obviously have been working on this, the president, the vice president, for quite a while, along with the folks on Capitol Hill. And you see the president's principles, PLES, what's most important to him in this regard. This is going to be a tax cut that benefits lower income and middle class households predominantly, and recognizing that relief to them is what is necessary. And it also stimulates the economy. It's also, Karen, I've been fairly critical in the past of a lot of the messaging that comes out that talks just to job creators and just to job seekers. It's like we didn't build that. Everything's about job creators, or job seekers, the unemployed or the underemployed. But the vast majority of American households, including if not especially those who are small business owners, are neither job creators writ large or job seekers. They're job holders. And they want to know why, even though they have 2 and 3 jobs in the household, they're not worried about losing a job or replacing a lost job. When did the job stop being enough to support the whole family? Your grandfather had a job, my grandfather had a job. It was enough to support the family, have a nice station wagon vacation, I guess now a minivan vacation each summer. But now now people who have jobs are white knuckled at the end of each month saying, I can't afford the rent or the mortgage. I'm struggling with the tuition payment or the student loan voucher for this month. And so that is something that is very much in our sights when we think about tax reform and tax relief, which are two different things. I think you're looking at the fall, probably, for a vote, but it could be sooner. But I think that's great to get that in the first year. We would just like some Democratic support because when George W. Bush as president passed tax reform in 2001, in June of 2001, he had 10 or 12 or so Democratic senators supporting him. The Democrats controlled the Senate at that time, and he got tax reform passed. So we would love to have some Democratic support as well. We know that there are taxpayers in each state, whether you're a senator, Republican, or Democrat, who are asking their representatives here in Washington for that type of relief. But this is a process, and the thing is, not only are you beneficiaries, but we also look at you as a resource. And I want to make that very clear today. We really want your members or entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs to be part of our coalitions, part of our outreach, be the resource We provide you with information about what's going on, but we really rely upon you to provide us with information as well. Very important to us.
I think one of the exciting things as well is reaching those communities that have sort of been left behind. And so FCC Commissioner Mike O'Reilly, and we've been working with the new chairman, who's fantastic, and who wants to really get broadband everywhere and, sort of get regulation out of the way so the private sector investment can just really flow, so we can give those communities the modern tool. I mean, how can you start a business, right, in, a country town or, without really having access to modern tools? So that's exciting. But also the infrastructure piece, the administration is pursuing as well. I mean, just really to have a first-class ecosystem of everything in this country, to be the best place in the world to do business and or to get ahead. Dominance. I know that's Energy Week. Energy Week talk.
Energy Dominance. We had a roundtable today in which I participated. We had leaders of the tribal nations. We had some tribal leaders. We also had 4 governors in there, and Secretary of Energy Rick Perry, former governor, of course, of 14 years of Texas, Administrator Scott Pruitt, and a representative for Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, since he's on the road today as well. But really talking about, what we heard from these governors and these tribal leaders was, it's really just getting the federal government mainly out of the way, in that whether it's the permitting process or the regulations, that energy development is a matter of national security, is a matter of job creation, is a matter of low energy prices and just independent self-sufficiency. It's under our feet and off our shores. It's just sometimes a matter of will to get this done. So that's really exciting. Infrastructure, I was speaking to a Democratic senator over the weekend and said, could we get your support on infrastructure? And just asking, what can you name 2 things we perhaps can work on? And why not infrastructure? Why not just recognize, talk about a nonpartisan issue in search of bipartisan solutions? Our air traffic control system alone was built for a time when we had roughly 100,000 air passengers a year. We're now close to 1 billion, Karen. And so for safety purposes, to reduce your hassle and increase your convenience, and certainly, most importantly, increase your safety, why not air traffic control reform? This is about our roads, our rails, our bridges, just the way that we move around. And there are many countries out there that are far more developed, and modernized than we are when it comes to infrastructure. So it's just exciting to have the President and Secretary Chow over at Transportation, others already looking at this. They invited in the transportation secretaries, and sometimes it's called something else in the states, but you understand the people in charge of this in each of the states. And they just gave these examples after examples that would shock your conscience as to why they can't move forward. But even the permitting process, to reduce that 8 years to 2 to 3 to 4.
Even 2, 3, 4 sounds crazy, doesn't it?
Exactly.
But that's progress. It really is.
It's progress in month 6 anyway.
So I got the 5 minutes 8 minutes ago, and I know we're going to have to wrap up. But with energy, small business dominates the energy sector.
does.
And we are
Yes, it
responsible
does.
for America's energy renaissance, the innovation. All the little guys and gals out there that have these companies that have really brought us to the point that we are today. But I think as a wrap up, real quick question. And for folks watching all over the country, on what advice would you give them, like inspiration for starting a business where they've held back? What would you say? Why is the right time to go for their dreams, just to go for it?
This is the right time to pursue your version of the American dream as entrepreneurship, because the taxation and regulation structures will be much more hospitable. The environment will be much more hospitable. And you see the confidence numbers to back this up. The small business confidence study, the home builders' confidence at a 12-year high, the manufacturers' confidence measures went from 56.6% a year ago to 93.3% this past April. That's not a rounding error. That's a huge leap. You see that people are spending their money again. You see the investment numbers up. You see that the market is really enjoying the moves by this presidency. And you also see a man in the Oval Office, a president who himself thinks like a business leader and is always sympathetic to the concerns and the barriers and the obstacles, but also very inspiring to those who have vision to see something nobody else can see. I think that's still the nut of entrepreneurship in this country. Karen, your ability to see something where no one else sees it. Why would you open up I just met her, a gourmet popcorn truck or business? We have so many of them.
Chrissy.
There you go. Why would you, who needs another coffee shop? Oh, good Lord, why would you? That's, again, vision where no one else can see it, and understanding the market demand, but also, Donald Trump invested in New York City when nobody else would. And there are, I don't know how many buildings, dozens that bear his name now. But I'm just using that as an example where you implement that, you ignore the naysayers and critics. I think the capital will be loosened up. I think people will still need to assume their own risk, Karen, recognizing that you're going to work harder than perhaps you ever have. You're going to face rejection. You're going to have to meet a payroll, figure out how to meet these healthcare expenses and the like. But at the same time, with actual policies being implemented that benefit you, you're assuming the risk of entrepreneurship, but you're reducing the risk of the unknown that I talked about, of the barrier to access and entry for so many entrepreneurs over the last however many years.
Well, Kellyanne, with that, inspiring. We'll go out and start a new business. No, that's great. It really
They
is,
should.
and
I miss it.
and I really appreciate you. Basically, your service to the country.
Thank
I know
you.
you're a very successful entrepreneur, and we really appreciate everything you're doing.
Thank
Your
you.
leadership, being here today. We have a friend in the White House, a fellow
Indeed.
entrepreneur. So
We
we
do.
can give Kellyanne
Thank
a
you.
round
God
of
bless
applause,
you.
please.
Thank you. And good luck. Thank you. Thank you.
A quick announcement. We're going to move right next door to the reception, and I saw Chairman Steve Shabbat somewhere, so we're going to get a few words of some insider information from the Hill on the small business agenda. So the reception is right next door. We're going to have books there. Dan Gilbert's Isms book that he so kindly dropped off for us. But please, help yourself.